Chapter 757. Forcing Wei Wei by to this point, she still wouldn't come back. Shen Anming made her show that kind of smile. He suddenly laughed coldly. Sure enough, he was still too indulgent with her. Shen Anming estimated that it was about time for his best friend's car to arrive at the entrance of the mall. He pulled Wei Wei by and suddenly rushed outside. Wei Wei by followed his footsteps. The two people ran without turning back, even their backs intertwined. They looked really loving. Su Mengue threw away the last cigarette and then revealed an icy smile. The game of hide-and-seek is over. With that, the people who had long been ready immediately rushed out. As soon as Shen Anming went out, he knew something was wrong. His best friend's car was stopped. His expression changed, and he pulled Wei Wei by to change direction. A group of people had already rushed over. They separated him from Wei Wei by and stuffed him into a black car. The car took them to an unfamiliar place. As soon as Shen Anming got out of the car, he was beaten to death. Wei Wei by immediately rushed over. Don't hit him, don't hit him. Shen Anming was afraid they would hit Wei Wei by and quickly said, Wei Wei by, it doesn't hurt. Don't worry about me. Even Wei Wei by couldn't help but feel moved by this deep affection. She said, it would be nice if this was a strategy target. System, this doesn't need a strategy at all. You haven't even hooked your finger and the favorability is already at 100. With that, the system couldn't help but sigh. This is so melodramatic. It's like Auntie Qiangyao has been possessed. Old jokes came one after another. It gritted its teeth until they were about to break. Just as they finished talking, Su Mengue slowly walked in. He looked at them with cold eyes and suddenly smiled. Are the two of you eloping or dying together? With that, his gaze turned into a knife as he stared fiercely at Wei Wei bai's hand. She reached out and hugged Shen Anming. Biting her lips, her eyes were filled with worry. It was as if Shen Anming was the most important person to her, and she couldn't bear to see him get hurt. His heart suddenly ached. The emotions that had been accumulating for a long time finally exploded. His expression twisted as he immediately walked over and grabbed her hand. Ignoring her cries of pain, he pulled her off Shen Anming. Then, he dragged her to the sofa nearby. Wei Wei bai almost screamed, Su Mengue, you might as well kill me. Just how long are you going to torture me? Torture? Who was torturing who? She's living a life of desperation this week. And because of her, he couldn't sleep, eat, work, or live a normal life. She was suffering, but how much better was he? Su Mengue's lips curled into a cold smile. I see that you're enjoying yourself to the point of forgetfulness. How long has it been, and you've already seduced another man to die for you? You're so charming, Wei Wei. That was the only bad thing about her. He always likes to attract bees and butterflies. Even someone like him, who harbored hatred, could be seduced by her. He really didn't know who in this world could refuse her charm. Wei Wei bai's face was blank, fear mixed with disgust. Let go of me. Shen Anming has nothing to do with me. Let him go. Su Mengue's eyes grew colder and colder. In the desperate situation he created. However, it was Shen Anming who came first. You like him, don't you? Su Mengue asked coldly. His eyes were bloodshot, like a pitiful trapped beast. Wei Wei bai said loudly, I already said, we have nothing to do with each other. I don't like anyone. Are you satisfied? Read the full text. / Read on. com / Chapter 758. After she finished speaking, she anxiously looked at Shen Anming. she found that the group was still beating him. Shen Anming was about to turn into a pig's head. This worried appearance, her eyes full of another man's appearance. Su Menguet slowly closed his eyes, his breathing almost breaking. He coldly said, "Stop." Those people immediately stopped and walked away. Only Shen Anming staggered and couldn't stand. His entire body swayed. He didn't care that his face was covered in blood. He immediately said to Su Mengue, "Su Mengue, what kind of man are you to bully a woman? The Bai family has been defeated by you. Can't you let Wei Wei go?" Su Mengue revealed a sinister smile. "Let her go. You really have a tacit understanding, pleading for each other." After he finished speaking, he released Wei Wei Bai. He took a few steps forward and punched him in the face. Shen Anming was knocked to the ground. Su Mengue looked at him indifferently. His aloof appearance was like looking at a stray dog. "Stealing my woman, who do you think you are? Even if I beat you to death here today, no one will dare to say anything." After he finished speaking, Su Mengue stretched out his foot and kicked fiercely. Shen Anming vomited blood from the kick. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't watch anymore. This psycho Su had rabies. He bit people as soon as he caught them. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her face and finally couldn't bear it anymore. She rushed up and grabbed Su Mengue's arm. "Su Mengue, let him go. I won't run." This sentence was like adding oil to the fire. Su Mengue looked back at her, his eyes red. His fierce appearance showed traces of grievance for no reason. "Do you care about him that much?" Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She almost cried. In the end, she couldn't lie to him. "Yes, I like him, so let me go. I beg you." He had forced her so miserably, but she didn't make a sound. She would rather sleep on the streets than admit defeat. In the end, she begged him for Shen Anming. Su Mengue finally felt fear. She had said so many times that she didn't like him. He still had hope in his heart that she still liked him. After all, she had treated him so well before. But when she begged him for Shen Anming, he finally saw the indifference in her eyes. She didn't like him. When he betrayed her, she didn't like him anymore. Su Mengue staggered back several steps, his face deathly pale. He laughed coldly, his voice extremely suppressed. "No one can leave today." With that, he stretched out his foot and stepped on Shen Anming's fingers one by one. Shen Anming let out a miserable shriek. Wei Wei Bai was furious. She hit him with all her might. "Su Mengue, let go of him, you lunatic." Su Mengue gritted his teeth. The strength of her fist was very heavy. However, the physical pain was nothing compared to the pain in his heart. The more she hit him, the more he tormented Shen Anming. Wei Wei Bai trembled with anger. She watched as Shen Anming was about to be tortured to death by Su Mengue. She saw a fruit basket on the coffee table beside the sofa with a fruit knife on it. Staking everything on one throw, she turned and rushed over, snatched the fruit knife, and resolutely pointed it at Su Mengue. "Let go of him. I'll let you let go." Her expression was firm, without a trace of hesitation. The tip of the knife almost pierced his chest. Su Mengue stopped his movements. His expression turned strange as he looked at Wei Wei Bai. Suddenly, he laughed. "You don't dare, Wei Wei." She wasn't ruthless. Even if she bared her fangs and brandished her claws, she was still a herbivore. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, her face pale. "Don't force me. Do you have to force me until I break down before you're satisfied?" "Su Mengue, I regret it so much." Su Mengue stared at her in a daze. "Regret what?" Tears fell from Wei Wei Bai's eyes. "Regret loving you, meeting you, and even more regret provoking you. Su Mingue's heart clenched, and even his breathing became unstable. His eyes trembled, but he didn't dare to show too much distress. He only vented all his pain on Shen Anming. He stretched out his foot and kicked Shen Anming again. Shen Anming was in so much pain that he couldn't make a sound. Su Mengue wanted him to die, as if this would stop her from looking at other men. Wei Wei Bai said, "Stop." When Su Mengue raised his foot again, his chest suddenly felt cold. He turned his head and saw his chest. The fruit knife in Wei Wei Bai's hand had already pierced his chest. Her eyes were cold. "I told you to stop." Slag Abuse Index, 85. Chapter 759. Su Mengue was injured. When the people around him were about to rush up, he suddenly said coldly, "Get out of the way. Let her stab me." Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled violently. The fruit knife pierced a little deeper. Su Mengue groaned, but his eyes were fixed on her. Her eyes were filled with cold hatred for him. This kind of indifference was more unbearable than the knife in his chest. Since when had his revenge become so different? Starting with the Su family, his heart began to distort. When he took revenge on the Su family, every stray dog lying in front of him could make him happy for a few seconds. But the black hole in his heart grew bigger and bigger. He wanted to take revenge on more people and make himself normal. Wei Wei Bai was his last target for revenge. But when he succeeded in taking everything away from her, he finally realized that he had lost her. All the things he won were meaningless. Su Mingue's eyes trembled. He said to Wei Wei by word, "Go deeper. This way, I won't die." The knife had only pierced in shallowly. It hadn't even pierced the bone. How could it pierce his heart? Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled even more. She revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Su Mengue, do you really think I don't dare to kill you?" She was so sad that she couldn't breathe. Even her voice was hoarse. Su Mengue didn't move. He didn't even take a step back. He reached out and grasped the knife. "If you really hate me that much, then kill me. Otherwise, I will still haunt you like a ghost." Wei Wei Bai sensed that his strength was great. The knife kept being pulled forward by him. The coldness in her eyes turned to fear. But Su Mengue had no intention of letting her go. He was like a gambler. Gambling on whether she still had him in her heart. Gambling with his life. Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She shouted, "Enough, do you want to die that much?" Su Mingue's expression was cold. He didn't care about the wound on his chest at all. He only wanted an answer. "If you kill me, I'll let you go." If she couldn't bear to part with him, did that mean he still had hope? Wei Wei Bai suddenly pulled back the knife. She staggered back several steps, looking at Su Mengue like he was a madman. Su Mengue was expressionless. His chest was stained with bright red blood. As if he didn't feel pain, his eyes followed her closely. "You don't want me to die?" Wei Wei Bai's limbs were weak and she looked tired, but her voice was still firm and cold. "You really think too highly of yourself. I will not look back on the man I abandoned." She looked at the knife in her hand and sneered, "Killing you is dirtying my hands. I won't become a murderer for you. It's not worth it." These words were simply heart-rending. Su Mingue's eyes dimmed and became lifeless. She held the blood-stained knife, her beautiful face was as cold as ice. Then she walked to Shen Anming's side and wanted to help him up. Su Mengue suddenly said, "You don't like me anymore." Wei Wei Bai looked at the bruised and swollen Shen Anming, who probably had 2 broken ribs, and said even more angrily, "Su Mengue, you're simply sick. Who would like you?" Su Mengue was silent. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought his scum abuse index would increase, she heard. Scum abuse index, 80. Decrease by 5. Wei Wei Bai, woof woof woof, what is this? You've been abused, silly. Why would the index decrease? Su Mengue sighed, not knowing who he was pitying. You're just angry at me. I know. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in disbelief. He was abused to this extent. How could he still have the face to say this? And he still had the nerve to decrease the scum abuse index. Wasn't it abuse enough? Comma. Chapter 760. Wei Wei Bai thought for a moment and still felt that they should send Shen Anming to the hospital first. Not waiting for her to help Shen Anming up. A hand pressed down on her shoulder. It was Su Mengue. His face was clearly pale from excessive blood loss, and he was even on the verge of collapse. But the strength of his fingers was still frighteningly strong. Wei Wei Bai frowned. Let go. Su Mengue glanced at her with indescribable gentleness. Okay. He let go. Wei Wei Bai was still wondering why he was so obedient. His loosened hand suddenly exerted force, turning into a hand knife that hit the back of her neck. Wei Wei Bai's vision went black and she fell down. Su Mengue struggled to hold her and gasped for breath. Call the doctor. Also. His eyes were terrifyingly cold as he looked at Shen Anming, who was paralyzed on the ground. He seemed to be considering whether to kill him or not. In the end, thinking of Wei Wei Bai's hateful eyes, he endured his mad jealousy. Throw him home and warn his father. If there's a next time, don't even think about the company. After Su Mengue finished giving the order, he softly sat on the ground. He reached out with his bloody hand and gently stroked her face. The tenderness in his eyes finally couldn't be suppressed. It doesn't matter if you don't like me. No one has ever liked me anyway. He chuckled twice. The laughter was unbearable to listen to. But don't think about running away. I'm already in hell anyway. Even if you hate me to death, you have to accompany me. This was his last prayer. For the first time, he liked someone. So much that even if he went crazy and died, he would drag her down with him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 80. Wei Wei Bai had a nightmare. In the guide, she rarely had nightmares. Thanks to the emotional skimmer, she didn't have nightmares every day after doing so many shameful things. This time, the nightmare was a bit exciting. Su Mengue cut her up with a knife, saying, I love you, as he cut her. She woke up with a start, afraid that she would wake up with a missing arm or leg. As a result, when she woke up and saw Su Mengue's face, she trembled. Su Mengue's face was a little pale. His wound had just been bandaged and he wasn't wearing a shirt as he sat by her bedside. When he saw that she had woken up, his gaze was gentle as he reached out to touch her forehead. Your fever is gone. You've been too tired recently, so you had a fever after you fainted. This week. She couldn't eat or sleep well. Fortunately, although the weather was a little cold, it wasn't cold. Otherwise, he would have fallen ill from the cold. Wei Wei Bai looked at the scum abuse index of 80 and could only accept her fate and continue to abuse him. She slapped his hand away and frowned. It's all thanks to someone that I'm like this. Su Mengue's expression didn't look good. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, started coughing because she spoke too quickly. Worried, he immediately went to get some water and handed it to her. Wei Wei, drink some water. Although Wei Wei Bai really wanted to drink it, she still dutifully slapped it down. The glass of water in his hand rolled to the ground. She looked like she would rather die than submit. Su Mengue, I don't need your fake kindness. Su Mengue looked at her, the gentleness in his eyes dimmed. She really hated him. How good she was to him before was how bad she was to him now. Su Mengue also figured it out. Slowly wear her down. Time would always wear away her anger. He had plenty of time to be with her. Thinking of this, Su Mengue's expression softened. You hate me. I'm going out. Saying this, he clutched the wound on his chest and walked out. The maid came in. She patiently poured water for Wei Wei Bai and wasn't afraid of being refused. She knocked the glass away and went to pour another one. Wei Wei Bai was worn down until she had no more temper. The main reason was that she was sick and didn't have the strength to toss and turn. She drank the water and took the medicine before lying back down. Tongzi, Su Mengue seems to have figured it out. Abusing him probably won't work. Crossover system, male god, come over here. /crossover system, male god, come over here / crossover system, male god, come over here to TXT. Download crossover system, male god, come over here, crossover system, male god, come over here. Chapter 761. Previously, she had been competing with him, which increased the scum abuse index. It was because Su Mengue didn't understand his feelings, so when he couldn't figure it out, it was more effective to abuse him. Now that he had thought it through, plus the guilt of betraying her before. No matter how harsh her words were, no matter how pretentious she was, he could endure. The system pondered for a moment before slowly reciting the poem. Far away, on the prairie. You, running. Ah, there are 100 mighty and majestic big dogs in front, waiting for you to bite their buttocks. Wei Wei Bai, the system said deeply, it's fine. If you don't abuse him, then don't abuse him. Isn't it just biting a few dogs? Can a person be forced to death by a dog? Wei Wei Bai, she silently thought, as expected, she still had to abuse Su Mengue to death. Wasn't it just abusing people? There weren't 1,000 ways, but there were definitely hundreds. No matter how hard it was to abuse someone, it couldn't be harder than biting the buttocks of 100 dogs. Wei Wei Bai only discovered that she was still in the Bai family when she got better. The furnishings were the same as before. Her room hadn't been changed, but everything was new. Perhaps because Su Mengue was recuperating, he didn't appear in front of her often. But from time to time, little things would appear around her. For example, when eating, a small bouquet of beautiful and delicate roses would be sent and placed on the side. Or when she was bored and drinking afternoon tea. A strawberry cake and a love confession card would also be sent over. The things weren't expensive, but they were very thoughtful. A trick that girls liked. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless and threw them all in the trash. She hadn't seen Su Mengue for a few days. Late at night, she knew that Su Mengue had returned. But she put some sleeping pills in the water she drank before going to bed every day. So when she couldn't wake up, she only found out when she watched the system replay the next day. This guy with a human face but a beast's heart. He held her and kissed her wildly, and it wasn't just on the lips. She was kissed everywhere. But he was careful not to leave any traces. If it weren't for the system, she wouldn't have noticed. Wei Wei Bai could only pretend that she didn't notice. Finally, one day, after dinner, she heard the familiar sound of a car parking. She knew that Su Mengue had come back to get something and would be back soon. Su Mengue had locked her up here and refused to see her. Wei Wei Bai knew very well that he was tormenting her. After a long time, her anger would not fade. It was impossible for a person to stay in a state of anger and hatred for a long time. He planned to lock her up until she calmed down. Only then would it appear. Wei Wei Bai didn't have time to waste with him. The scum abuse index and favorability points had stopped increasing. If he didn't work hard, he might even fail the main quest, let alone the side quest. After all, there was not much time in this plane. Just as Su Mengue was about to get in the car and leave, he saw a figure in a blue dress running out of the door. Under the dazzling lights, she was as beautiful as a rose under the lights. Her skin was fair and translucent, and her cheeks were flushed. She looked exceptionally lively. During this time, he would sneak out to see her at night. He hadn't seen her open her eyes yet. Xinyan grabbed him, making him reluctant to get in the car. He only wanted to see her. Wei Wei Bai rushed in front of Su Mengue, gasping for breath, and snapped, "Su Mengue, how long are you going to lock me up? You're illegally imprisoning me." Su Mengue looked at her with gentle eyes, but his mouth was indifferent. "I don't mind if you call the police. At https://www.sashu.com/ Full text at https://www.sashu.com// Download text at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 762. Wei Wei Bai stared at him fiercely, but her voice suddenly softened. "Su Mengue, how is my father?" Su Mengue said gently, "He's fine. He's still sleeping. I'll have the doctor look after him." "Wei Wei Bai, I don't believe you. I want to see him." Su Mengue froze for a moment before smiling. "What good is it for me to let you see him?" Wei Wei Bai clenched her fists, itching to punch him a few times. In the end, she gave up and said, "Up to you. You can do whatever you want." Su Mengue didn't want to see her so sad. He turned and opened the door. "Let's go to the hospital to see him." There was a flash of surprise in Bai Weiwei's eyes. She immediately got in the car and followed him to the hospital. In the hospital, Bai Qingshui's condition wasn't very good. It seemed that his internal organs were beginning to fail. Su Mengue knew that it was because of the drug. When he drugged him, he didn't care whether Bai Qingshui would die or not. But ever since he fell in love with Wei Wei Bai, he had people look for the antidote for this poison. There should be one in the United States, and there was news. So even if Bai Qingshui had deteriorated to this point, he still didn't care. He was still in no hurry. When the antidote came, Bai Qingshui would be healed. Then Wei Wei Bai wouldn't hate him too much. Wei Wei Bai and Su Mengue left the hospital. Her expression was sorrowful. Why is his internal organs failing? Why is it suddenly like this? His body has always been very good. Su Mengue pursed his lips. His expression was calm, without any guilt. "It's fine. I will cure him." Wei Wei Bai looked up at him. There was finally no cold disgust in her eyes. Instead, there was a trace of wavering emotion. Su Mengue saw it and couldn't help but smile. She didn't hate him that much. As long as there was time, he could make her put down her hatred and fall in love with him again. Suddenly, a woman rushed out from the side. "Mengue, Mengue, it's me." Su Mengue saw the woman and his expression changed. He immediately grabbed Wei Wei Bai's hand. "Let's go back." The woman had waited so long to see him. How could she let him go? She rushed over and hugged Su Mengue's thigh. She cried and shouted, "You said that if I poisoned Bai Qingshui for you, you would let me be your mistress. How could you go back on your word?" Su Mengue's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in disbelief. Su Mengue immediately kicked the woman away. His calm expression finally cracked, revealing an impatient and anxious side. He quickly tugged at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei, don't listen to her. The woman was unrelenting, screaming, I betrayed by Qing Shuwei for you. How can you treat me like this, Su Mengue? Wei Wei Bai looked at him with a pale face. It was as if she was looking at a stranger. She asked, did you really poison my father? Su Mengue's lips trembled. He was just about to say no. But Bai Weiwei looked at him with sharp eyes and said word by word, don't lie to me, right? Su Mengue was silent for a moment. With this kind of attitude, how could he not understand? Weiwei Bai smiled. Her smile was full of mockery. I never thought you could be so vicious. Su Mengue, I will never forgive you in this life. Saying this, she opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. Then she drove off. Su Mengue chased after her with all his might, shouting, Wei Wei, come back. But the car soon disappeared. A cell phone rang. Su Mengue picked it up with trembling fingers. It was Wei Wei Bai calling. He answered, his tone humble. Wei Wei, it's all my fault. It's fine if you hate me and want to kill me, but don't drive so fast. Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, do you like me? Su Mengue immediately nodded. I like you. Wei Wei Bai, me too. On the phone, her speed seemed to be very high and the noise was very loud. But her voice had never been so clear. Su Mengue was stunned. You too what? I like you. I always have. Wei Wei Bai's calm voice collapsed. She finally cried in a low voice. Why should I like you? Because I like you. I caused my father's death. I caused my father's life's work to be in vain. Su Mengue's mouth and tongue were dry. His heart was throbbing. Wei Wei, suddenly, there was a violent crash from the other side of the phone. Wei Wei Bai's voice weakened. Su Mengue, I don't like you anymore. If I die, my father won't blame me. In the next life, I don't want to. Su Mengue felt like he had fallen into an abyss. The violent crash on the phone was a car accident //. Chapter 763. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. Scum Abuse Index, 85. The favorability alert and the Scum Abuse Index alert sounded at the same time. Wei Wei Bai lay in the deformed car, her face covered in blood. She dizzily said to the system, this scum is so stingy. I risked my life, but it only went up so little. The system was nonchalant about this series of melodramatic jokes. It was already very calm. It couldn't be more melodramatic, the system thought. Then it said to the host, it's okay. 15 days of life value in exchange for a discounted immortality sticker. I guarantee that no matter how serious your injuries are, you will be able to recover afterwards. Wei Wei Bai tilted her head and leaned against the steering wheel, blood pooling on the ground. She struggled to keep her eyes open. That's good. I can't faint yet. I have to hold on until Psycho Sue comes and abuse him again. Otherwise, I'll be letting down my 15 days of life value. She was distressed about her life value. She'd managed to save up almost a year of life with great difficulty. She couldn't waste it. Su Mengue returned faster than expected. The car hadn't gone far. He used his power to access the surveillance footage of all the nearby roads and saw the tragic scene of Wei Wei Bai's car losing control and crashing into the guardrail on the side of the road. The car had been driving steadily at first. But for some reason, it suddenly lost control. It was as if she deliberately lost control, she did it on purpose. Su Mengue returned to the scene of the accident and saw the deformed car. The airbag hadn't popped up in time, causing Wei Wei Bai to suffer a violent impact. Her entire body was sprawled over the steering wheel. Her long black hair was stained with blood and plastered to her nearly transparent face. Her eyes were half open. Her beautiful black eyes were dim and lifeless, making people feel pity for her. For a moment, Su Mengue didn't dare to step forward. An icy tremor and intense fear rose in his heart at the same time. Her eyes seemed to move as she stared blankly at Su Mengue. Su Mengue abruptly woke up. He frantically ran over, one step at a time. His foot hit a rock and he fell to the ground. He continued to climb up, ignoring the pain, and rushed to the front of the car. He wanted to open the car door. However, the door was deformed and difficult to open. Su Mengue could only grit his teeth, his voice trembling. "Wei Wei, don't be afraid. I'll save you." Wei Wei Bai's eyes slowly lost their light. She moved her lips and blood flowed down from her forehead. She looked very scary. Su Mengue kicked the car door, loosening it a little. He kicked the car door with all his might. He kept comforting her, "I'm here to save you. You have to hold on, Wei Wei." This was the first time he was so afraid of death. He was afraid that if she closed her eyes, she would never open them again. Wei Wei Bai finally said with difficulty, "Get lost. I'd rather die than be with you." This sentence consumed all of her strength. Su Mengue's movements stiffened. His heart was dripping with blood, but he suppressed his despair on the surface, not daring to show it. He even humbled himself. "If you don't want to, you can hit me, scold me, or even kill me. Look at me. I'm so angry that I don't want to sleep anymore." He could see that Wei Wei Bai was on the verge of death. He couldn't let her fall asleep. Once she fell asleep, not many people could wake up. Su Mengue kicked the car door again, and it finally loosened. He anxiously opened the car door and bent in, reaching out to carry her out. Wei Wei Bai softly fell into his arms, covered in blood. Chapter 764. For the first time, Su Mengue felt that blood was so frightening. He trembled at a loss, not knowing where she was hurt because she was covered in blood. He could only hold her helplessly and rush to his car. He had to race against time. Her life was being drained away with every second. Wei Wei Bai leaned into his arms, her breathing gradually weakening. Su Mengue kept pleading, I beg you, don't fall asleep, Wei Wei." The sound of an ambulance came. Su Mengue seemed to have seen his savior and immediately changed direction. He ran in the direction of the ambulance. He hugged the girl he liked so tightly that it was as if the Grim Reaper couldn't take her life away. The ambulance saw him and immediately stopped. A group of professional doctors and nurses ran over with an emergency bed. Su Mengue placed Wei Wei Bai on it and shouted, "Hurry, hurry. Breathe." She was going to lose her breath. The ambulance had a full set of emergency equipment. Wei Wei Bai was brought up. Su Mengue held her hand tightly and kept saying, "Wei Wei, get up. You hate me and get revenge on me. Don't lie down like this. You can't use yourself to hurt me. This is too cruel to me." By the end, this man, who was good at enduring and had a viper-like personality, choked with sobs. It made one's heart ache. Wei Wei Bai's face was covered in blood. Her eyes were closed and she didn't respond. The doctor had already started emergency treatment. Suddenly, the instrument sounded a warning. The patient's heart stopped and she entered a state of shock. Su Mengue trembled, his face pale. He looked at her in panic. The doctor began to rescue her. With great difficulty, during the golden time of emergency treatment, the shocked Wei Wei Bai's heart started beating again. When Su Mengue heard the doctor say, "No problem," the patient will definitely be able to hold on until the hospital for surgery. His entire body collapsed. When he came back to his senses, he found that he was covered in cold sweat. Just now, when Wei Wei Bai's heart stopped, during the few minutes of emergency treatment, it was as if he had died once. When they arrived at the hospital, Wei Wei Bai was pushed into the emergency room. Su Mengue refused to let go of her hand and followed her into the emergency room. No matter how much power Su Mengue had, the emergency room was no laughing matter. The doctor had no choice but to say loudly, "Mr. Su, you can't be there to save the patient. It will affect the doctor's performance." Su Mengue could only let go and watch her enter the emergency room. He stood outside the door in a daze. After standing there for an unknown period of time, he finally regained his senses. He turned around, but before he could take more than 2 steps, he stumbled and almost fell. Only then did Su Mengue realize that all the strength in his body had been sucked away. When he saw how Wei Wei Bai had almost died, his mind was filled with nothing but revenge and company. The bone-deep pain made his brain feel like it was going to explode. Su Mengue's body was still trembling from fear. He was afraid of Wei Wei Bai's safety. Su Mengue sat in a chair and took out a cigarette. His fingers trembled incessantly as he laboriously took a drag. He sucked too quickly. Instead, he choked himself. He coughed, and his tears fell without warning. Su Mengue gritted his teeth, his eyes red. "How can you die? I won't allow it. I won't allow you to die, Wei Wei Bai." She was too ruthless. How could she use her own death to retaliate against him? This was the first time Su Mengue hated someone so much. It was also the first time he loved someone so much. / To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button below to record your reading record. Chapter 765. Scum Abuse Index, 90. Congratulations to the host for completing the side mission. Ding, the male lead's favorability, 90. Wei Wei Bai was seriously injured, but because of the undying sticker bought by the system, she was able to endure it. Her body was able to survive this fatal car accident. But because it was a discounted item, it still hurt when it should hurt. So the prodigal system didn't ask for her permission and used painkillers on her. Wei Wei Bai slept for 3 days and finally regained consciousness. She didn't feel any pain, but she felt that her body was very weak. When she woke up, she looked at the favorability and scum abuse index. The scum abuse index was finally completed. She didn't have to bite the buttocks of 100 dogs. It was really touching. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Where's Psycho Su?" The system glanced at her. "He's outside talking to the doctor about your condition. He hasn't slept for 3 days and almost died from exhaustion." Su Mengue really hadn't slept for a second these 3 days. It was frightening. If he fell down, he wouldn't be able to get up. System, then how do you farm the favorability next? To abuse people beyond recognition, you came up with a hatred joke, a daddy joke, an imprisonment joke, and a heart-tormenting joke. The last one is a suicide joke. It's basically cut off all paths for you to farm favorability. So many old-fashioned and melodramatic abuse jokes. The endings were all headed for tragedy. There was no room for regret. The system even felt that Su Mengue was scared when he saw Wei Wei Bai. The favorability probably wouldn't increase. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's question and fell into contemplation. After a moment of silence, Wei Wei Bai said, "I was only thinking about the side mission. I didn't think about the main mission for a while. The last 10 points of favorability were the most difficult to farm." She couldn't continue to abuse people until his favorability increased. Su Mengue wasn't a real masochist. It wouldn't work. If she suddenly became affectionate towards Su Mengue, this character's setting would collapse. This turning point was so stiff that even she didn't believe it. Su Mengue was even more unconvinced. Wei Wei Bai thought about it. There's no other way. I can't abuse him anymore. I have to eat some sweet cookies for a change. After all, Psycho Su is obviously lacking in love. If I give him some love, his favorability will increase. Once he tortured him. Let's see how slowly the affinity increases. If he were to continue tormenting him, he could forget about increasing his favorability with him. The system said, if you keep stuffing him with knives and suddenly give him cookies, he'll think it's poisonous and won't eat it. Just a second ago, she hated him so much that she wanted to die. The next second, immediately darling, I love you, is this going to work? Wei Wei Bai nodded solemnly. So I can only use my ultimate weapon. System, ultimate weapon. It sounds so grand and mighty, so mighty and majestic. Su Mingue's clothes were a mess. His face was haggard, and his beard hadn't been shaved. His eyes were dim as he opened the door and entered the ward. He thought that Wei Wei Bai had not woken up yet. Therefore, he did not try to hide his fatigue. In these 3 days, Luo Langhua had come to take over the shift so that he could rest. Of course, he knew that the body's condition after resting would be able to better take care of Wei Wei Bai. But there was no other way. He couldn't sleep at all. Once he closed his eyes, it was a nightmare of Wei Wei Bai's face covered in blood and her heart stopped. He was so scared that he didn't dare to close his eyes. That feeling was too painful, more painful than not closing his eyes for 3 days and 3 nights. Su Mengue reached out and rubbed his face. Suddenly, he stiffened. His fingers were still on his face. Through the gaps between his fingers, he saw a pair of bright and beautiful eyes looking at him with some doubt. Chapter 766. Su Mengue stiffened for a few seconds before immediately releasing his fingers. His voice was dry. Wei Wei, you're awake. Although the doctor said that she was out of danger, he was still worried before she woke up. Now that she was awake, he suddenly couldn't face her. He hadn't forgotten that she hated him to death. She hated him so much that she would rather die than be with him. Su Mengue thought a lot these 3 days. He always brought her disaster. But when he thought of letting go, he couldn't bear to. He couldn't bear to. Just like this, these 3 days, he struggled fiercely between letting go of her and being entangled with her even if he had to die. Su Mengue clenched his fingers in his pocket. He straightened his back, and his lips trembled twice. He finally said, "You think you can escape me by dying? Don't be delusional." He wouldn't let go of her, not even in death. Wei Wei Bai frowned but only looked at him. Quietly and strangely, she looked at him. Su Mingue's lowly threat paused. He also looked at her in a daze, but he didn't see the disgust in her eyes. Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. Her lips were pink, but her eyes were very bright, so much so that they were excessively clear. Finally, Wei Wei Bai asked softly, "Are you someone I know?" Su Mengue, system, Wei Wei Bai's ultimate weapon, unparalleled dog blood old joke, 10,000 spirits, honest to all, amnesia. The system, splashed with dog blood, didn't want to speak anymore. It still underestimated its host's thick skin. So trashy that she had to use a joke that everyone disliked. Could it still be properly captured? Wei Wei Bai was incomparably calm. Even if she had amnesia, it had to be fresh and refined, different from those coquettish bitches outside. She pursed her lips. There was no fear in her eyes, only some confusion. "You don't know me." You're not my family. The word family finally woke Su Mengue up. A clear guess flashed through his mind. He slowly walked over and gently held her face. Wei Wei, he said gently. Wei Wei Bai's brows relaxed. My name is Wei Wei. Su Mengue stared at her face, wanting to find a trace of hatred for him on her face. No, there was nothing at all. There was only a clean gaze and an expression as innocent as a child's. Su Mengue probed, do you remember who I am? Wei Wei Bai looked at him in distress. She tried to think for a while, but her head hurt so badly that she couldn't help but gasp. Su Mengue's fingers quickly pressed her temples. Do you have a headache? He still remembered that her head had been severely injured. Wei Wei Bai looked at him curiously. She felt that he was very gentle and couldn't help but smile. I forgot, but you should be my family, right? If they weren't family, how could they be so gentle? Su Mengue's eyes darkened. He held his breath. His mind was in chaos for a moment before it was suppressed by reason. I'm your husband, he said tentatively, one word at a time. A trace of surprise flashed through Wei Wei Bai's clear and blank eyes. Husband. I'm married. Su Mengue still didn't relax his vigilance. He nodded, but his eyes didn't relax, remaining on her expression. He wanted to find traces of whether she was lying to him. If a person wanted to deceive someone, it was impossible to leave no traces behind. Especially Wei Wei Bai, who had a personality that didn't know how to deceive people. Wei Wei Bai frowned in confusion. No, you say you're my husband. Do you have evidence? I can't believe anyone who casually says something. Who knows if you're a bad person or not? Slash. Chapter 767. Su Mengue couldn't help but smile. He was indeed a bad person. A very bad person. This was indeed Wei Wei Bai. She hadn't lost everything, hadn't been hurt by him. The Wei Wei Bai that still carried a trace of willfulness and innocence. Su Mengue said in a hoarse voice, what proof do you want? I'll get our marriage certificate for you to see. Although they weren't married yet. Although there was no certificate. However, as long as he gave the order, these things could be forged immediately. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. I want to prove it now. Su Mengue patiently asked, how do you want to prove it? Wei Wei Bai said, come closer. Su Mengue gently approached. In his eyes, all kinds of complicated emotions eventually turned into deep affection. Just as he was about to say something, a kiss gently fell on his lips. Su Mengue was stunned. Wei Wei Bai closed her eyes and earnestly kissed him. This kiss was incredibly soft, but it carried a magic that made people sink into it. Su Mengue didn't dare to move, for fear of interrupting this emotional kiss. Wei Wei Bai kissed him for a while before leaving him. She revealed a brilliant smile. And I believe you are my husband. Su Mengue's voice was bitter, and his heartbeat was abnormally fast. Didn't you not remember? Why do you believe me? Wei Wei Bai playfully glanced at him. Her eyes were clear, and her thick black hair draped over her shoulders. Her face had a trace of haggardness, but it made her appear even more delicate and beautiful. She didn't seem to know how to guard against people and reached out to grab his hand. Then she pressed his hand to her chest. Did you hear that? Wei Wei Bai said with a smile. My heartbeat sped up. It said I like you very much. Under Su Mengue's palm was a ball of softness, and under that softness was the sound of a heartbeat. A heartbeat as fast as his. He held his breath, and a blush began to spread from behind his ears. You like me? Wei Wei Bai released his hand and said doubtfully, and how can I get married if I don't like you? Although I don't remember, I still remember the feeling of liking you. After saying that, she added seriously, even if I forget you, I haven't forgotten the feeling of liking you. This means that I like you very, very much. So, you're definitely my husband. She spoke softly and sweetly. Every word was filled with warmth. But Su Mingue's heart ached. He wished he could kill himself. He had forced her to the brink of death. When she woke up, she had forgotten everything. But she still remembered the feeling of liking him. For the first time, Su Mingue clearly felt how deep Wei Wei Bai's feelings for him were. His voice was hoarse but gentle. Yes, we got married because we loved each other. I like you very much too. For the first time, Su Mingue thanked her for forgetting everything. But she did not forget her love for him. He lowered his head and kissed her. Wei Wei, you are Wei Wei Bai, my wife. I am Su Mingue, your most beloved man. Wei Wei Bai nodded blankly and then said seriously, I know, Xiao Meng. Su Mingue's body trembled, and his eyes reddened. He thought that she would never call him by this name again. He actually didn't like such a girly nickname. But now, he was so grateful that he couldn't suppress the emotions in his heart. His voice carried nostalgia and joy. A faint answer, but full of gratitude to fate. And full of affection. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 93. Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 769. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, you come to Sashu.com in Baidu to find the Wei Wei Bai studied the document. It was too real. This Photoshop photo was simply a god among gods. If she hadn't lost her memory, she would have thought she had taken wedding photos. She saw the hospital information and casually asked, why are we going to the hospital together? Su Mingue faintly replied, I'm checking the quality of the sperm. You're checking if the body is pregnant. Wei Wei Bai had already seen the sperm test report. She still had some medical knowledge. The quality of the report was pretty good. It was at least 98% in the country. Hee hee. Wei Wei Bai put the document back with a stiff face. Then she nodded. I believe you. Su Mingue breathed a sigh of relief. He reached out and dotingly rubbed her hair. Of course you believe me. Because you love me. It was only after she lost her memory that he realized this. If she didn't love him, how could she forget everything except for her love for him? Su Mingue had never felt so loved by someone before. Wei Wei Bai gently patted his hand away, her bright black eyes fixed on him. Then do you love me? Su Mingue's Adam's apple bobbed up and down before he finally nodded. His eyes were a little red. Love, very much. When she was in a car accident, he had never realized it. Losing a person could be so terrible. This feeling of dying with her at any time. If it wasn't love, then what was it? Wei Wei Bai seemed to feel that his expression was too complicated. A trace of pity flashed through her eyes. Then she couldn't help but lower her head and kiss his eyes. Such beautiful eyes, you can't cry. After she finished speaking, she seemed to feel that she was a little mushy and chuckled. Her smile was bright and warm. Su Mingue rubbed his eyes and couldn't help but laugh as well. He didn't expect that letting go of everything, being loved, and loving someone would be so happy. This was the first time that Su Mingue truly understood the meaning of the word happiness. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 95. Wei Wei Bai stayed in the hospital for a week. She was so seriously injured, but fortunately, her most important internal organs weren't damaged. In the end, his bones were only fractured. His head, which had suffered the most serious impact, was also checked to find no residual blood clots. Except for amnesia. It was a miracle that she survived the car accident. Therefore, she was discharged from the hospital a week later and went home to rest. Su Mengue transformed the Bai family. The Bai family would definitely give Wei Wei Bai a sense of familiarity. When the time came, he would say that this was the place where they got married. She would not suspect anything even if she felt a sense of familiarity. He was the kind of person who could perfectly cover up the traces of his crime and create a crime scene. To maintain this beautiful lie, he had to do it. He was like a criminal with a high IQ. He changed all the places that could give the game away. After Wei Wei Bai returned home, she glanced at the room and said, "I seem to have lived here before." Su Mengue calmly responded, "Of course you've lived here. This is our house." Wei Wei Bai did not suspect anything. She stayed behind to recuperate. Su Mengue was like a 24 filial husband, taking care of her. Wei Wei Bai didn't have to do anything. She could just eat and wait for death. Su Mengue had a bouquet of flowers every day and a small surprise every 2 or 3 days. Wei Wei Bai gave him an appropriate smile and a few sweet words. His favorability would rise at the speed of a turtle. It rose by 2 points. It was almost time for the strategy to end. There were still 3 points of favorability left. Wei Wei Bai didn't expect that she could coax his favorability to full 100 with just a few words. Chapter 770. The system was also Buddhist. In any case, it watched the 2 drama queens add scenes for itself every day. It had nothing else to do but eat popcorn. The system silently watched them and thought, the most melodramatic amnesia joke is here. There couldn't be a more old-fashioned, more melodramatic joke. There shouldn't be. Su Mengue only worked half a day at work and often didn't go to work. The workaholic from before was gone forever. After an important meeting, he threw the documents to Luo Langyue. "I'm off work." Then he ignored his partner's pitiful gaze. He walked out. He drove back to the Bai family. The garage wasn't closed. He had just gotten out of the car when he saw an irksome presence. Shen Anming was standing not far from his car. When he saw Su Mengue, he immediately rushed over and was about to say something. Su Mengue didn't give him a chance. A left hook made him fall to the ground. Then he turned around, preparing to call someone to deal with Shen Anming. Shen Anming suddenly pounced over and hugged his thigh. "Where did you hide, Wei Wei?" "Su Mengue, I went to the hospital." "The hospital said Wei Wei lost her memory, right?" Su Mengue's expression didn't change. "Let go." Shen Anming didn't give up. "You're simply a madman. Bastard, you must have tricked Wei Wei into being with you. She lost her memory and you still lied to her." Su Mengue's expression changed. He gritted his teeth. "Let go." Shen Anming wasn't afraid of death. "Wei Wei doesn't like you anymore. She's starting to like me. She promised to be my girlfriend." Su Mengue took a slow breath and finally couldn't help it. He reached out, tore off his tie, and rolled up his sleeves. Then he lifted Shen Anming and gave him a violent beating. Shen Anming couldn't beat him, but he was very resistant. He was beaten into a pig's head and still roared, "Su Mengue, you bastard, you lied to her. Don't you feel guilty?" Shen Anming had heard that Wei Wei Bai was going to marry Su Mengue, so he ran over. Plus, he'd investigated that Wei Wei Bai had lost her memory. With this association, what didn't he understand? "You are despicable," shameless and shameless. Su Mengue kicked him until he couldn't get up. Then he crouched down, revealing a sinister smile. I'm despicable, so I got her. Who do you think you are? With that, he stood up, pulled down his sleeves, and straightened his clothes. After making sure that his clothes were clean and tidy, he left. Su Mengue walked out and ordered the bodyguards to pull Shen Anming out. The Shen family had paid a huge price to save Shen Anming's life. So Su Mengue didn't kill Shen Anming to the last. In addition, he was in a good mood recently. He spared his dog life. Shen Anming was still roaring before he was dragged out. Su Mengue, if she recovers her memories, she'll definitely hate you. What was cheated is cheated. Do you think you can hide it from her for a lifetime? Su Mengue's footsteps paused, his body straightening. After a while, he took a deep breath and relaxed his body. With a gentle smile, he walked into the house. Amnesia was a very difficult disease to cure. As long as they did not come into contact with a particularly familiar scene, they would not recover their memories. All the decorations of the Bai family, as long as they were of special significance, he put them away. He only gave her a sense of familiarity that wasn't stimulated. The rest had all disappeared. So Wei Wei Bai wouldn't remember anything so easily. She wouldn't remember. When he entered the house, it was just in time for lunch. Wei Wei Bai sat at the dining table, her hand propping up her chin as she eagerly waited for the food to be served. // Chapter 771. Su Mengue came up and lowered his head to give her a kiss. I'm back, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai pulled out a chair next to her. You're back. Just in time to eat. Su Mengue smiled and sat down. Then he took out a box from his pocket. This is the heart-shaped diamond bracelet I bought at the charity banquet last night. Try it on. He put it on her. The beautiful sapphire bracelet shone even brighter on her snow-white wrist. Wei Wei Bai smiled. I like it very much. With that, she casually picked up the decorative ribbon beside her and tied a bow around his wrist. This is a return gift. The gift is light, but the thought is heavy. Although it's just a ribbon, it has my kiss on it. Saying this, she lowered her head and kissed his wrist with her pink lips. Her warm breath brushed against the skin of his wrist. It was incomparably numb. Su Mengue's fingers trembled. He pursed his lips and couldn't stop smiling at her. Just as the dishes were served, Su Mengue began to pick up food for her. Her body hadn't fully recovered, so her diet was strictly selected. As Wei Wei Bai ate, she casually asked, right, was there anyone outside just now? Su Mengue paused in the act of picking up food and then quickly returned to normal. No. The garage was far from here. Even if he heard some sounds, they must have been very vague. Bai Weiwei muttered to herself strangely, you don't. It seems I heard wrong. Su Mengue thought of Shen Anming's words and didn't know why he felt depressed. He looked at Wei Wei Bai. Her eyebrows and eyes were filled with a gentle smile. After losing her memory, she had a bit more of a young girl's naivety. From time to time, she would be a little willful. No matter how he looked at it, he felt it was rare. Su Mengue didn't know why, but he couldn't help asking, if one day you find out that I did something wrong, will you forgive me? Wei Wei Bai didn't think much of it and lightly replied, what wrong? I won't forgive you for cheating. Su Mengue, I won't cheat, Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, I won't cheat. What's there to be afraid of? Just don't lie to me. Su Mengue's hand trembled, his smile somewhat stiff. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice that something was wrong with him. She said casually, I hate it when people lie to me, so even if you have an affair, don't lie to me, okay? Su Mengue smiled. If I don't lie to you when I have an affair, when will I lie to you? If I don't lie to you when I have an affair, then it's impossible for me to lie to you about other things. One lie after another. Su Mengue maintained his calm facade, but inside, he began to feel a stabbing pain. No matter what he did, he was afraid that she would regain her memory. And this was something he couldn't control. Wei Wei Bai turned around and said gently, I believe you. You won't lie to me, and you won't cheat on me. Su Mengue looked back and saw the seriousness in her eyes. He didn't look away and said in a low voice, yes, I won't cheat. But he didn't dare to say that he wouldn't lie to her. Wei Wei Bai was in the same room as Su Mengue. Because of her recuperation, he only hugged her to sleep. He endured bitterly, but he didn't dare to act rashly. After all, her health was what he valued the most. Su Mengue listened to the sound of water coming from the bathroom and could only focus on his notebook. He continued to deal with his work. The bathroom door opened, and Su Mengue turned around. But he was stunned. Wei Wei Bai's long hair was wet and draped over her chest. She wore a cherry blossom-colored translucent nightgown. Her faintly discernible white body was full of temptation amid the silk-like fabric. Her cheeks were flushed from the steam, and she looked at him with bright eyes. She was a little shy, but she stared straight at him, her eyes carrying a bit of seduction. Su Mengue's breathing became heavy. Wei Wei Bai slowly walked over, every step like an enchantress. She could draw out a person's soul. Su Mengue's heart raced and his body stiffened. He didn't know how to react. Wei Wei Bai walked in front of him and sat on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. She leaned close to him, her bright red lips softly spitting out a sentence. Husband, it's late. Let's do something fun. Su Mengue only felt that his heart was about to jump out of his chest. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 98. //. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Fast. Chapter 772. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, the feeling of home. Let him feel that someone is waiting for him. I'll show you. With that, Wei Wei Bai stood up, her eyes focused and affectionate, her smile happy and warm. She jumped up from the sofa, like a cute little bird, and threw herself into his arms. She didn't let go, her voice 3 parts coquettish and 7 parts sweet. Hubby, you're back. I love you so much. Su Mengue stiffened, his eyes filled with shock and ecstasy. He blinked, unable to stop his fingers from running through her hair and stroking her head. He felt her true body in his arms. His eyes were a little red as he faintly responded, I'm back. Wei Wei Bai, I love you too. These weren't sweet words. They came from the bottom of his heart. He was willing. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 100. Congratulations to the host for completing the main mission. The host is in good physical condition. Before the end of the mission, you can freely choose whether to stay or not. Wei Wei Bai and the system couldn't help but applaud. Amazing, amazing. 100, there was no way to refute this. It was based on strength. Wei Wei Bai, I was just demonstrating. I didn't think I'd succeed on the first try. Of course, she wouldn't tell the system this. She silently chose to act cool. Wei Wei Bai revealed a smug smile and released him. She was about to say something. The system's automatic reminder came again. Ding, additional side mission of 100 favorability. Please increase the scum abuse index to 100. Additional reward, 20 days of life value. There is no punishment for mission failure. Host, please play happily. Wei Wei Bai furiously knocked on the system. Your uncle, there's actually an additional side mission when the favorability is maxed out. Why wasn't there before? System, when did you ever die when you weren't maxed out? Of course there wasn't an additional side mission. Wei Wei Bai, 20 days of life value and no punishment. I actually missed such a good thing because I died again and again. System, Wei Wei Bai said excitedly, completed. It's just abusing a scum. The system couldn't help but remind him, you said that you want to be sweet until the end. Wei Wei Bai, really? The wind is too strong, and I'll hurt my tongue. It doesn't count. Ah, I forgot that the thickness of the host's skin is beyond that of a human's. It should not hold her to the standards of human shamelessness. The system suddenly thought of something and said in a trembling voice, you're not going to use the meme of recovering memories, are you? This was simply a twice-cooked pork trotter. Amnesia was sweet. Recovering his memories was a bitter experience. The same recipe was cooked twice. Wei Wei Bai, am I such an old-fashioned person? You don't need to recover your memories. The system was looking forward to it. It didn't need to recover its memory. What else could he do? It was already so sweet. Then, it silently ate another handful of popcorn. When Wei Wei Bai was eating, she acted coquettishly again. I don't want to stay at home every day. I want to go to work. Su 100 favorability. Meng Gue had become a slave to his wife. Be my secretary. I'll take you to work. They were together at work and together after work. Su Mengue felt very good. Wei Wei Bai smiled and said, okay. Then Wei Wei Bai began to follow Su Mengue to work. When she went to work, there was a housekeeper and 2 maids waiting on her. When Su Mengue was working, she was responsible for enjoying life. After working for several days, the time for the strategy was only a few days away from ending. The system reminded, continue to be sweet. The last 10 points of the scum abuse index remained motionless. Button at the bottom to record the reading record. Chapter 773. It was impossible for Su Mengue, who had a favorability of 100, to easily touch the scum abuse index. Because he was already blessed to the heavens. How could a happy person feel like he was being abused? Wei Wei Bai had just finished her afternoon tea when she heard the reminder. I almost forgot about business. She came to abuse scum, not to play games, watch TV, and eat desserts. After speaking, she glanced at the time. It was time for Su Mingue's meeting. Recently, Su Mingue's company had been planning a very important cooperation case. If this case failed, it would cause the entire group to fall into chaos. But once it succeeded, M Group would become a behemoth that no one could shake. Wei Wei Bai walked to the table and began to rummage through things. She flipped through a pile of information on the case. Then she filmed it and sent it to Shen Anming. Soon, Shen Anming's call came. Wei Wei Bai counted the time. When she heard the system remind her that Su Mengue had returned, she picked up. Shen Anming's anxious voice came through. Wei Wei, why do you have this? This information is very important. After Wei Wei Bai confirmed that the person standing outside the door was Su Mengue, she turned her back. Then she revealed a cold smile and said grimly, yes, Anming. If this information is leaked out, Su Mingue's company will definitely go bankrupt. I want him to lose all standing and reputation. The man outside the door pushed the door open halfway. His body stiffened, and he didn't move. He looked inside the door at her slender figure with her back to him. She didn't seem to know that he had come. Her tone was full of disgust. I hate him to death. You have to avenge me, destroy this case, and make his company go completely bankrupt. The door slowly opened. Su Mengue stood outside the door. Wei Wei Bai didn't notice that her voice had softened. After this revenge is successful, let's be together. This voice was full of tender love. Su Mengue remembered that she had hugged him in the morning and said that she liked his appearance the most. Much sweeter than this phone call. Much softer. Much cuter. Was it just fake? Su Mengue stared at her in a daze, not even daring to take a step forward. A terrifying thought kept circling in his mind. Wei Wei Bai turned around casually while talking on the phone. I don't like him anymore. Ever since he betrayed me, I have no feelings for him. After saying this, she seemed to realize something. She looked up and saw Su Mengue standing at the door. She hurriedly turned around. She was still holding the phone in her hand, and around her were confidential documents about the project. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be unsure how much he had heard, so she hurriedly packed up the documents. Suddenly, a hand snatched her phone away and he hung up. Then, her fingers pressed down on the documents she was about to tidy up. Su Mengue confirmed once again that this was indeed confidential information for this cooperation. His eyes turned scarlet and ferocious, but they still carried a humble hope. Wei Wei, have you recovered your memories? Only when she regained her memory would she hate him so much. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. Her fingers pressed against the documents. She was silent for a few seconds before she turned around. Then her eyes were ice-cold and her voice was incomparably gentle, but it made Su Mengue feel cold from head to toe. Recover my memories. I've never lost my memories. Why would I need to recover my memories? Su Mengue's throat was dry. He wanted to make a sound to stop her from speaking, but he couldn't say a word. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Her smile was incomparably sarcastic. She fiercely pushed him away. Su Mengue lost all his strength. It was clearly a very small amount of strength, but he was easily pushed to the ground. He sat on the ground, his eyes even carrying traces of fear. Wei Wei, don't say any more. Wei Wei Bai looked at him from above, a mocking smile on her lips. I only pretended to lose my memory to numb you, steal your company's confidential information, and destroy you. Do you really think I love you? These words made Su Mengue lose his last hope. He looked at her in despair. His body felt like it was dead, and his blood was cold. He pleaded, letting go of a man's self-esteem. Don't say any more, Wei Wei. Don't say any more. Leave him with a bit of hope. Don't take away all of his sweet and beautiful memories. Too cruel. Wei Wei Bai didn't give him the slightest chance to escape. She wanted to kill him in one blow. She bent over, her expression gentle, but her tone was as ruthless as a viper's. Pretending to love you. It's disgusting. Ding, Scum Abuse Index 100. Side mission completed. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 774. 100 Favorability Points. It was a deep love. Once hurt, it was a heart-wrenching pain. Su Mengue felt that every time he breathed, it was a kind of torture. The air turned into a knife, and every time he went in and out, it was excruciating pain. His eyes were scarlet as he awkwardly got up from the ground. He tried his best to calm himself down. It was just that he didn't love her. It was just a deception from beginning to end. What hadn't he experienced? He would definitely be able to endure this kind of pain. He forced a smile. Okay, Wei Wei, don't joke around. Let's go home. This smile was so sad that it made one's heart ache. Wei Wei Bai looked at the Easy 100 Scum Abuse Index and thought about the change in her personality. She felt that if she suddenly changed her face and said that she was just joking, that she actually still had amnesia and still loved him. Even if Su Mengue was a fool, after being deceived so many times, he wouldn't believe it. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Can we leave early?" System, after accepting the additional side mission, you have to stay until the last day of the strategy time before you can leave. There are only 4 days left. It'll be very soon. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Then she felt that she had finished everything in this plane. She reckoned that there wouldn't be any more tricks in the future. So Wei Wei Bai said very calmly, "Su Mengue, you took everything from me. I also let you experience my feelings. Now we're even. Goodbye." Su Mengue was probably afraid of being abused. Wei Wei Bai felt that he wouldn't want to see her in the next few days. People would instinctively avoid those who hurt them. By the time he figured it out and came to find her, she would probably have left. Wei Wei Bai thought it through and felt that there shouldn't be any major events in the next few days. So after she finished speaking, she walked out. Just as she was about to open the door, Su Mengue took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "Have you never loved me?" Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. She showed great compassion and said, "I loved you, but then I just didn't love you." It was a simple sentence. He summed up all her tricks. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai opened the door and went out. Su Mengue didn't stop her. He stared fixedly at Wei Wei Bai's calmly departing figure, his scarlet eyes full of moisture. He blinked his eyes, blinking away his cowardly tears. Then, he took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and started smoking with trembling fingers. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the crowd below. Wei Wei Bai would soon go downstairs and join the crowd. From then on, she never knew him again. Their marriage was fake, their love was fake, and their happy future was fake. He was the only one who took it seriously. Su Mengue couldn't help but laugh. There was a heart-wrenching misery in his laughter. He choked on the smoke and clutched his chest. His lips trembled, and he felt as if his chest was about to split open. Su Mengue thought of his cheap mother. He did not have a good impression of her. The deepest impression she had of him was when she kept looking through Bai Qingshui's photos a few days before she died. Some of them were cut out from newspapers. Some were from magazines. She was crazy, affectionate, and incomparably sorrowful. "Everyone in our family is a madman who lives for love. I love him so much that I would rather die with him." She repeated this sentence again and again. Like a curse, it was branded in his heart. Even though she had been dead for so many years, when he recalled this woman, it was only this image. Su Mengue finally realized the meaning of her words at that time. Yes, they were all madmen. All of them. Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com to facilitate your next reading. You can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 775. Su Mengue's twisted and sorrowful expression slowly calmed down. Only his pair of eyes were sinister and terrifying. It was like an endless abyss, making people shudder. He abruptly turned around and quickly ran out to chase after Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai went downstairs and remembered that she had come in Su Mengue's car. She could only stand at the intersection and wait for a taxi. It was rare that she hadn't left this world after completing the mission. These last few days, she didn't want to see the mission target or the people she knew in this plane. After all, as soon as she saw them, she felt like she was at work. It took a lot of effort to maintain one's character. She was off work and wanted to relax. Bai Weiwei, Tongzi, why don't I go on a love trip with you for the next 4 days? System, a love trip. Wei Wei Bai sighed. I've been working and neglected you who loves me. You've suffered. I finally have a holiday and can love you properly. System, Wei Wei Bai, what do you want? A diamond ring of love or a honeymoon trip to the Maldives? I'll give it all to you. The system felt dizzy and nauseous. It struggled to spit out a sentence. Do you have money? Wei Wei Bai, she had been supported by Su Mengue all this time. There was no need for money at all. Moreover, she didn't think that she could continue to stay in this plane after completing the mission. So after abusing him, she left. She didn't even take the bag she threw in the president's office. After a moment of silence, she said, "Do I have to continue sleeping on the streets?" The system, disgusted enough by drama queen Bai, said, "Sleeping on the streets is still good. You're so confident that Su Mengue will let you go after being abused by you." Wei Wei Bai said with experience, "Normally, after an emotional injury, one will be dispirited for a while. At least for a few days, at most for a lifetime. So Su Mengue is busy being hurt and sad. He definitely doesn't want to see me." The system was about to say that Su Mengue didn't look like a normal person. A familiar car stopped in front of Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai took a few steps back and was almost knocked over. She turned around and saw Su Mengue sitting in the driver's seat. His eyes were dark as he looked at her. However, his expression had already calmed down. He said, "Wei Wei, let's talk." Wei Wei Bai frowned. She had to change her character setting again. After all, he had just finished tormenting someone, so he couldn't immediately lose his temper. She sneered, "There's nothing to talk about. We're even now. Don't bother me. Don't make me look down on you." Su Mengue gazed at her as if she was the only one in his eyes. He closed his eyes as if he was suppressing something. Su Mengue's voice was hoarse. "You haven't packed your things yet. If you really hate me that much, then pack your things and move out." Wei Wei Bai knocked on the system. "We don't have to sleep on the streets anymore. I'll go pack up the cash and we'll go for a ride." System, fuck, you still dare to go back? Aren't you afraid the male lead will take revenge on you? A man whose favorability and scum abuse index were both 100. Wei Wei Bai probably didn't have much of an idea of this. After all, in the past, when her target's favorability reached 100, she would die when their favorability reached 100. She didn't realize how terrifying 100 favorability was. Not to mention, Su Mengue still carried a 100 scum abuse index. This was simply extreme love intertwined with extreme hate. This was a nuclear bomb. Chapter 776. Wei Wei Bai heard the system's worry and said softly, "It's fine. It's only a matter of a few days at most. I'll leave, and I have you. What am I afraid of?" How could Su Mengue retaliate against her? At most, it would be another imprisonment joke. There were many old jokes in this plane. Imprisonment jokes weren't popular. When the system heard this, it was suddenly moved. The host finally knew how hard it worked. In the past, when those little systems talked about being praised by the host, they were happy. It was dismissive. But when it was its turn, it almost couldn't hold back its tears. The system was just about to say, "It's fine, I'll cover you." Wei Wei Bai muttered, "It's better than sleeping on the streets. Imprisonment is better. There's a place to sleep and someone to serve me." The system's tears were forcibly choked back. "You got in the car because you didn't want to sleep on the streets, not because of me. By scumbag liar Wei, no, it's all because of you. Don't doubt my sincerity." It might rain in the next few days. Sleeping on the streets is very uncomfortable. System, bah. Liar, the host was a big liar. Su Mengue calmly waited, as though he would let Wei Wei Bai go even if she didn't get in the car. She hesitated for a few minutes before opening the door and getting in. Su Mengue's face was taut. Fasten your seatbelt. Wei Wei Bai fastened her seatbelt. Su Mengue started the car. The whole journey was quiet. The two didn't say anything. After all, they'd already shed all pretense of cordiality. Words wouldn't work. Wei Wei Bai looked at the road outside. The more she looked, the more unfamiliar she felt. Su Mengue was silent. She finally couldn't help but ask, "Where are we going?" Su Mengue's dark eyes finally looked at her. That look was terrifyingly twisted. He suppressed it and said coldly, "I have a villa in the suburbs. You can see the sea there." Wei Wei Bai frowned. So what? Su Mengue's calm expression finally couldn't be maintained. His brows slumped, and his voice contained ridicule. Nothing much. It's my birthday in a few days. I just want to watch the sea with you as a birthday present. When he said this, his fingers were gripping the steering wheel and his veins were bulging. His tone became calmer and calmer. I love you, Wei Wei. Since you don't love me and want to part on good terms, I'll fulfill your wish. But everyone has a beginning and an end. If you celebrate my birthday with me, I will let you go. From now on, you will never see me pester you again. Wei Wei Bai pondered for a moment before looking at him in confusion. Really? Su Mengue revealed a haggard and bitter smile. I'm tired, really tired. Loving you is too hard. Even if I want to pester you, I can't. Wei Wei Bai thought of how she would torture him. This chain of events could indeed make one doubt life. Su Mengue continued, I've already separated the Bai family's company from mine. The documents have been signed. Your father's illness has been treated with medicine and has begun to improve. In the future, you will still be the little princess of the Bai family, and the Bai family will return to your hands. Wei Wei Bai asked, Su Mengue, you want to give these to me? Su Mengue looked ahead. The villa was getting closer and closer. He said indifferently, yes, we meet and part on good terms. From now on, we are even. This sentence was light, but heavy at the same time. It made one feel uncomfortable to hear it. Wei Wei Bai was concerned about not sleeping on the streets and readily agreed. Okay, I'll celebrate your birthday with you. Do you want me to order a birthday cake for you as a gift? Su Mengue shook his head, indicating that he didn't need it. Fast fast to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record this reading. Fast. Chapter 777. Su Mengue shook his head. The car had already entered the garage. He opened the car door and said to Wei Wei Bai, let's go in first. I remember there's a room with the best view of the sea. Wei Wei Bai wasn't afraid at all. After all, they were going to leave. Even if Su Mengue really wanted to retaliate against her or imprison her, she wouldn't feel any pain or itch. After entering the villa, Su Mengue locked the door. Then he turned his head to look at Wei Wei Bai. She stood in the living room. Her beautiful profile, her white skin, and her black hair that curled like seaweed made her as beautiful as a dream. Su Mengue's eyes deepened. His eyes were red, dangerous and twisted. Then he reached out and used his fingerprint to activate the villa's security system. The villa's protective equipment was fully automated. All of a sudden, all the villa's doors and windows automatically locked, and the iron bars on the outside appeared. The villa suddenly became a cage. No one could escape. Wei Wei Bai looked around in surprise and hurriedly turned her head. Su Mengue, what are you doing? Su Mengue's eyes were fierce and wild. Those scarlet eyes couldn't wait to devour a person. He smiled, and the madness in his smile made one's back numb. Su Mengue slowly said, from now on, we'll part on good terms. I won't pester you, as if. Surprisingly, there was a hint of deep affection in his words. But it was more dangerous and irritable. He slowly rolled up his sleeves, his eyes as frightening as a hunter catching prey. Wei Wei, I won't ask you to love me. Hate is also fine, but don't be deluded into thinking that we're even. After he finished speaking, he walked up and vigorously picked her up. Ignoring her weak struggles, he carried her up the stairs. There was a large room upstairs with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the sea. The sea view was unobstructed and particularly beautiful. Su Mengue threw her on the bed and tied her hands with his tie, tying her to the head of the bed. Wei Wei Bai reacted. Fuck, Tongzi, this Su Mengue turned from love to hate and became a rapist. She wasn't a fool. Looking at Su Mengue's disposition, he looked like he was going to force himself on her. The system put on an act and said, I told you, you'll take revenge if you're forced, but you just had to get in the car. Also, look at the dress you're wearing. Your calves are exposed. It would be strange if a rapist didn't fancy you. It's all your fault. You deserve it. Su Mengue's expression was ruthless, like he wanted to kill someone. He unbuttoned his shirt and took off his pants. His movements were powerful and swift. Like a wild beast. He saw her fearful eyes and smiled. Wei Wei, don't be afraid. It might hurt a little later. You can scream as much as you want. No one here will listen. Su Mengue reached out to cup her face and licked her lips with the tip of his tongue. He was very possessive. His fingers rubbed her face with a little too much strength. They moved down and hooked onto her collar. Su Mengue's eyes darkened. Only I can hear it. And I like your voice the most. I really want to hear you scream for a lifetime. As long as she didn't say those hurtful words again, it would be fine. Wei Wei Bai expressionlessly knocked on the system. Help. The system ate popcorn. Kacha kacha, Wei Wei Bai made a final struggle. Her voice trembled as she said, Su Mengue, you are committing a crime. Su Mengue faintly grunted. Then, without any trace of politeness, he tore open her collar, revealing her white underwear. His tone carried a chilling smile. You are my crime, Wei Wei. Saying this, his entire body covered her, carrying the despair of not being able to obtain anything. Even if she hated him to death, she still had to pester him. He was a madman just like his mother. Fast/fast //fast fast. Calm fast. Chapter 778. Bai Weiwei was pressed down so hard that she couldn't breathe. She desperately tried to retreat. But he held her head and blocked all her cries for help with a feverish kiss. Su Mingue's eyes were dark and full of suffocating, twisted gloom. He licked her lips, breaking into her mouth and recklessly stirring inside. This wasn't like a kiss. It was more like a terrible and powerful oppression that didn't allow her to make any resistance. Weiwei Bai lay powerlessly on the bed. His shadow completely enveloped her. Weiwei Bai gasped for breath and said to the system, "If you don't think of a way, I won't give you popcorn to eat." The system's action of chewing on the popcorn shook. How did the host know it was eating popcorn? Weiwei Bai, crunch, 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 I can smell the fragrance of the popcorn, you prodigal. Imprisonment is imprisonment, and you're forcing yourself to be low. Tell me. The system didn't know if it should hide the popcorn in its hands. Didn't you want to sacrifice yourself? Just sacrifice yourself. You've flirted with so many planes, it's too unreasonable to still be a virgin. Wei Bai, I'm a virgin. Is sacrificing myself so worthless? I've already completed the mission and still want to sacrifice myself. If the favorability doesn't soar by 50 points, I won't sacrifice myself. System. Fuck, 50 points of favorability. You might as well rob. With your looks, you can't get more than 5 points. Wei Bai, give me back the popcorn. System. With your national beauty, how is 50 enough? You need 500. Wei Bai, although this truth sounds good, I'm still unhappy. Seeing the host's face grow darker and darker, the system, who couldn't bear to part with the popcorn, had to give up its plan to watch the show. It flipped through the store's discounted products. Recently, it was all stickers that were on sale. In the 15-day life value area, it found a substitute sticker. Wei Bai had only communicated with the system for a few seconds when Su Mengue tore off her clothes. His movements were swift and terrifying. His usual gentleness seemed to be an act. Only this person with scarlet eyes and a strong invasion was his true face. Wei Bai's skin was very white. When he exerted force with his finger, it left a red mark. Wherever his teeth had gnawed, they would leave behind frightening scars. Suddenly, Wei Bai couldn't help but cry out. His teeth bit down hard on her soft and delicate waist. The smell of blood spread between his teeth. Su Mengue gently licked the blood that seeped out, his eyes dark and burning. Wei, you're driving me crazy. Since you know you're crazy, why aren't you contacting the mental hospital? Get out of my way, you lunatic. Wei Bai heard the system say that there was a substitute sticker and stuck it on her. She didn't have to worry at all. Therefore, she lifted her leg that was not tied up and stepped on his face fiercely. She wished she could kick him off the bed. Unfortunately, Su Mengue's strength was much greater than hers. He reached out and grabbed her ankle, easily moving it away. Then his whole body covered her. His bloody lips captured hers, hating to swallow her into his stomach. Su Mengue was so excited that his body trembled. He kept kissing her, leaving one kiss after another on her skin with traces of kisses. I won't leave. How can you say you don't love me anymore? You're too cruel to me. When you loved someone, there was no way to let go so easily. Su Mengue couldn't understand. How could she say she didn't love him anymore so easily? There wasn't a trace of emotion left in her heart. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 779. The corners of Wei Bai's mouth twitched. She didn't wait to say anything. Shameless Su was already naked. He walked directly into the bathroom to turn on the water. Wei Bai's face was devoid of love. This feeling of the soul not participating, but the body being strengthened. She really didn't feel anything. When it was pleasurable, the soul wasn't at home. Afterwards, the discomfort of the body's severe disability came back. Wei Bai hugged the quilt, tears streaming down her face. This sticker was too unreliable. She used 15 days of life to buy a fake Taobao product. Her heart was broken. Then, when she took a bath, it broke through her shameful threshold. He thought her face was thick enough to block an atomic bomb. He didn't expect that she would also feel shame. Fuck, where is this hand going to reach? Do you want to take a bath or eat people? Wei Bai felt that if it weren't for her, she would look like a broken doll. Su Mengue would probably force himself on her again. The system reminded, the discounted substitute stickers are sold in 3 sets. There are still 2 unused. Wei Wei Bai, scram. Su Mengue went to the kitchen in a good mood. Wei Wei Bai's hands and feet trembled. She couldn't get up. She said, I should have slept on the streets. She was too confident. She thought that Su Mengue, this psychopath, would hesitate for a few days. Only then would he be able to walk out of the huge blow. Who knew that a psychopath wouldn't follow the routine and completely overturned her car? This car was supposed to go to kindergarten. Now, it was directly entering a heavy-flavored hot pot restaurant. Su Mengue walked in with a tray and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed in a daze. Her slender body was wearing large pajamas. Under the loose collar, a touch of white skin was revealed. His eyes darkened. Then he suppressed the anger in his body and walked over. When Wei Wei Bai saw him, her body instinctively trembled. There was no helping it. Her body didn't have any strength. She had sat for too long and her muscles couldn't be controlled. Su Mengue's footsteps paused. The gentle smile on his face slowly disappeared. Was she that afraid of him? Su Mengue's lips curled in a mocking smile. Of course he was afraid of him. He had just done something worse than a beast. She probably couldn't wait for him to die. Su Mengue suppressed the discomfort in his heart and still showed a gentle smile. Wei Wei, eat something. Wei Wei Bai felt that it was only normal for her to flip the food over and kick him out. In the end, when she saw the bright shrimp porridge and the appetizing side dishes, her stomach failed to live up to her expectations and became hungry. She lowered her head and didn't say anything. But this was enough to make Su Mengue pleasantly surprised. He thought that she would tell him to get lost. Wei Wei Bai's fingers were a little weak. She held the bowl in silence and slowly drank the porridge. On the side, Su Mengue's heart softened. But before he could be happy for a few seconds, Wei Wei Bai's expression suddenly changed. The bowl in her hand trembled and fell to the ground. She was already sprawled on the edge of the bed, vomiting. Su Mengue suddenly stood up, his face twisting. Wei Wei Bai furrowed her brows in discomfort. The few mouthfuls of porridge she had just drank were all vomited out. Her stomach was empty. It wasn't uncomfortable, but rather a very strange feeling. It was as if her body would reject whatever she ate. Wei Wei Bai said, "What's going on, Tongzi?" "System, today is almost over. You still have 3 days before you die. Your character in each plane has a way of dying. As long as you don't leave early or change your way of dying, your original way of dying will automatically appear." Only then did Bai Weiwei remember this. Because every time she died, she was the one controlling the time. So she didn't use the original way of dying at all. It made her forget that there was such a thing. Then how did I die this time? Starving to death. Even if you eat, you will reject it until you starve to death. Wei Wei Bai trembled. This way of dying was too cruel. Her body was suddenly pulled up by Su Mengue, his eyes sinister. He said, "Do you disgust me that much?" Comma. Chapter 781. But he still restrained himself. After kissing her, he picked her up and brought her to another clean room. Wei Wei Bai might have been tired and fell asleep at once. Su Mengue covered her with a quilt and saw her long hair scattered messily on the pillow. Her face was turned to the side, and her eyes were closed like a quiet child. She looked exceptionally well behaved. If only she could stay like this forever. She had always been so well behaved. Su Mengue's eyes became affectionate and paranoid. He went next door and began to tidy up the room. For him, doing housework or cooking was essential knowledge. She hadn't eaten for almost a day. Su Mengue knew that if a person suffered a huge blow, they might become anorexic. He stood expressionlessly on the balcony and looked at the beach in the distance. He finally turned on his phone. There were countless messages from Luo Langyue on the phone. He dialed back. Luo Langyue's voice roared. "Where are you going? The company is going to close down and you're still fooling around outside." Su Mengue was expressionless. "If it's going to close down, then close down. Find me a doctor and 2 nurses. Luo Langyue, are you hurt?" Su Mengue was silent for a moment. "It's Wei Wei. She doesn't eat. Luo Langyue doesn't eat. She's not picky about food. You can just have the chef cook a few more dishes. The company's information has been leaked. Fortunately, only a portion of the information has been leaked. I'm in a terrible fix right now. Hurry back to the company and help." Although closing down was a serious statement. But the information leak did give them a headache. If Su Mengue was here, this matter could be perfectly resolved. After all, it wasn't like they hadn't encountered more serious crises before. Su Mengue was completely indifferent. The company isn't important. She doesn't eat all day and vomits whatever she eats. I won't let her go, so I'll have the doctor give her an infusion to supplement her nutrition. Luo Langyue realized the seriousness. What the hell? Why is it so serious that she needs an infusion? With Wei Wei Bai's heartless appearance, what kind of blow could make her unable to eat? Why did he feel that even if the world was ending tomorrow, that woman could happily eat a pot of braised pork trotters? Su Mengue was expressionless. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "She hates me and wants to leave me, Luo Langyue, don't tell me she's regained her memories. She'll definitely hate you if she does, but women need to be coaxed, right?" Su Mengue, coax? Luo Langyue said patiently, "Even if she remembers, you just have to be gentle and follow her around shamelessly. Don't force her, and don't imprison her either. Just play a few of the CEO Cinderella's romantic tricks. After a year or 2, she'll succeed." Su Mengue, Luo Langyue, don't restrain her for now. What's the use of locking her up if she doesn't have a heart? First, cry bitterly and kneel in front of her, say that your heart was blinded by lard and beg for forgiveness. Su Mengue, I feel like I've been shot by an arrow. Luo Langyue, even if she doesn't forgive you, just let her go and pursue her again. Don't force yourself on her. What do you mean by forcing yourself on her? Those are just lies to fool a fool. Who in their right mind would love a rapist? Su Mengue, I feel like I've been cut down by a 40-meter-long broadsword. Luo Langyue, okay, can you come to work soon? I'll teach you my 20 years of chasing girls while you work. Su Mengue finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Then, what if I do? Luo Langyue was silent for a moment. Then you don't have to go to work. I can take care of the company by myself. Your problem is more difficult than the company going bankrupt, hehe. // Chapter 783. It was like he was going to kill someone. When Bai Weiwei saw the doctor leave, she said to the system, "This way, Su Mengue will wear away his love for me. Once I'm gone, he can better immerse himself in another relationship." After all, 100 favorability was completed. Even if the target suddenly didn't love her anymore, she could be considered to have completed the mission. The system was shocked. You really are a kind girl. This was simply not letting go of the male lead even when she was about to die. She still wanted to abuse him before she was satisfied. Shameless white, of course. System, after Su Mengue walked in, he didn't say anything. His attitude was still hardworking. He began to make many of the things Wei Wei Bai used to love to eat. But Wei Wei Bai was no exception. They all vomited. Su Mingue's expression became more and more dejected. Every time she vomited, heartache, gloominess, and madness intertwined in his eyes. After 3 or 4 days, Wei Wei Bai was so weak that she couldn't get up. She wore white pajamas, like a ghost. After today, she could leave. Starving to death really wasn't something a person could bear. Fortunately, she didn't really starve to death. After all, 3 or 4 days plus the nutrition from the 4 drip. It wasn't so painful that she couldn't hold on. But even if her body could hold on, she still had to leave. Su Mengue made porridge again. She hadn't eaten for so long. If she wanted to eat, it had to be liquid food. But Wei Wei Bai refused. She was afraid of vomiting. Su Mengue had erupted once yesterday. She didn't eat, so he forced it down her throat and even used his mouth to feed her. But no matter what method he used, it was useless. Even if he succeeded for a while, she would still vomit after a while. The power of the rules was really powerful. Yesterday, he seemed to have confirmed that she was on a complete hunger strike. Su Mingue's despairing eyes made one's heart ache. Wei Wei, try again. Let's try. Although Su Mengue wasn't as frightening as yesterday, he still tried to make her eat. Seeing the girl he loved go on a hunger strike. No one could imagine the pain he suffered. Wei Wei Bai weakly shook her head. I won't eat. Su Mengue, take it away. Su Mengue held the food and stood in a daze for a long time. He finally couldn't help but smile. His eyes were cold and desolate. Then, he turned around and left with the food. He didn't force her like he did yesterday. Wei Wei Bai felt dizzy and said softly to the system, Slagstem, next time if there are any weird ways to die, remember to inform me. The system replied, sometimes, I would only find out how you died much later. After all, this isn't the most important information. Wei Wei Bai used to think that it was not important. Only now did he realize that it was too important. Today, he might starve to death, but tomorrow, he might die from overeating. The main system was simply crazy. How could it screw the host over like this? In the evening, Su Mengue began to decorate the room. He ordered a birthday cake. He opened another bottle of red wine. Facing the sea through the floor-to-ceiling window, he said to Wei Wei Bai, Wei Wei, today is my birthday. Wei Wei Bai said weakly, Happy birthday. Su Mingue's eyes were incomparably deep. He suddenly reached out and hugged her, bringing her to his lap. Then he laughed softly and said, Eat some cake. Saying this, he reached out with his finger, smeared some cream on it, and gently smeared it on her lips. Wei Wei Bai hadn't eaten for a long time. Smelling the cream made her a little nauseous. In fact, in the later stages, when it was more painful, the prodigal system would use painkillers. He didn't think that painkillers could really alleviate the pain of hunger. So Wei Wei Bai didn't suffer much. Chapter 785. Yi Yuxuan woke up with a start. He gasped for breath, his black eyes full of fear. Then he raised his hand. His slender and beautiful fingers were clean and white. There was no blood. But the feeling of the blood flowing out of her body and sticking to his hand was so clear and terrible. He killed her. Yi Yuxuan immediately stood up, his head full of cold sweat. He walked to the bed and saw that Wei Wei Bai was still asleep. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but reach out and gently touch her face. He touched her inch by inch, feeling her white and tender skin, the temperature that belonged to a living person. She slept quietly, Her breathing was steady. Her heartbeat was also very normal. Yi Yuxuan breathed a sigh of relief. Then he sat by the bed and stared at her. She breathed shallowly. The morning light in the room fell on the pillow and dyed her black hair with a fine luster. The room was very large and connected to the garden. The white walls were hung with elk hand paintings. The gray cushions, the warm color of the carpet. There was also a big brown bookcase, and a flower arrangement on the table. There was obviously nothing pink, but it looked like a girl's room. It was very soft and very warm. He analyzed a lot about her strange illness. During this time, he also spent a lot of energy in meetings with various experts in this field. In the hospital, Qin Qiu also said that she could just go home to recuperate with a set of life-sustaining medical equipment. After all, the Bai family and the Yi family both had private doctors and nurses. If there was no major life-threatening situation, she didn't have to lie in the hospital all the time. Yi Yuxuan originally wanted to take her back to his home. But Bai Changyan insisted that he couldn't. After all, she hadn't married him yet. How could she live with him directly? The word marry made him stare at Bai Changyan for a few seconds before he reacted. Yi Yuxuan thought for a long time and found that it seemed to be a feeling of being moved. It wasn't too uncomfortable, but it was a good feeling. Then he agreed to let Wei Bai go home. And he followed her in. Yi Yuxuan still had a headache when she recalled that dream. The taste of her dying in his own hands made his entire body turn cold. He was actually able to experience a little of that crazy feeling. Fortunately, it was just a dream, probably a dream. Yi Yuxuan's eyes were dark and calm, but his body couldn't help but move closer to her. It was as if the more he leaned against her, the more he felt that she was real and would not leave him. Finally, he slowly lay down beside her, his body close to hers, and those cold feelings finally disappeared. He let out a sigh of relief and put his hand under her neck. His other hand hugged her waist and pulled her into his embrace. It was done in an instant. Then he closed his eyes tiredly. He fell asleep again. Not long after he fell asleep, the eyelashes of the person in his arms fluttered. Wei Bai gritted her teeth. Why didn't you stab me earlier or later? You waited until I was about to starve to death to stab me to death. You'll suffer double the punishment. The system retorted, who asked you to torture him again? Before she died, she deliberately provoked the male lead. This was only because the male lead had good manners. If it was more perverted, he would even do that after killing her. Wei Bai said, yes, I'm too kind, that's why I want him to find a better relationship. System, don't you feel guilty saying that? You were just being naughty before you died. It felt that it shouldn't talk to its host anymore. If this guy's words could be listened to, a pigsty would have to grow on a tree. An automatic notification sounded. Host has completed the mission. Received 30 days of life points, a total of 354 days of life points. Chapter 786. External life value can be accommodated for 500 days. Wei Bai didn't have the mood to bicker with the system. Her breathing was a little difficult, as if there was something hot imprisoning her. She couldn't help but frown. The system's reminder was still ringing. Ding, 15 days of immortality stickers, 15 days of substitute stickers, 10 days of painkillers, 2 expired system popcorn for 4 days. Fuck, expired popcorn, only 4 days. This was the first thing Wei Bai saw. Not a prodigal, her good system. It actually knew how to buy expired food to eat. Wei Bai smiled in relief. Even her life value was deducted for 44 days. There were only 310 days left, and they weren't as shocking. Then she opened her eyes and almost closed them again in shock. She saw a face so handsome that she couldn't find any flaws. His skin was so good that she couldn't see any pores, his nose was straight and standard, and his thin lips were beautifully shaped. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. Her brain almost couldn't work. The beautiful light shone on his short black hair, giving off a dazzling halo. A man who brought his own light board. Sleeping, it was as beautiful as a god in a good position. In hindsight, Bai Weiwei remembered that she didn't cross planes, but returned to reality. And the man sleeping beside her was Yi Yuxuan. He was close to her, very close. There was a sense of dominance in the way he hugged her. He almost held her in his arms, making her unable to move. Then she felt that something wasn't right. She raised her head and looked around. Wasn't this her room? How nostalgic. After transmigrating for so long, she stayed in the hospital for so long. She was finally home. Bai Weiwei didn't wait for him to finish being moved, but Yi Yuxuan frowned. She didn't know why, but she was nervous and her breathing became heavier. These few breaths woke Yi Yuxuan up. He abruptly opened his eyes. His black pupils were deep and bottomless. Then he saw her face. The deep darkness in his eyes softened in an instant, bringing with it a ray of light that imprinted her entire being within. Unexpectedly, it was exceptionally stunning. Yi Yuxuan pursed his lips slightly, and his expression became gentle. "You're awake." A faint sentence, "You're awake." It was not the calmness of facial paralysis. It wasn't a tense indifference either. Instead, it was a quiet gentleness. The snow melted from the corners of her eyes and the tips of her brows, bringing warmth. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but blink. She felt that the Yi Yuxuan in front of her was still a little unfamiliar. It was as if every time she woke up, he would change a little. Wei Wei Bai curled up in his arms and finally couldn't help but remind him, "What are you doing?" Yi Yuxuan answered calmly, "Sleep." Wei Wei Bai said, "This is my room." There was also her bed. What was even worse, there was also her person. Yi Yuxuan looked at her silently, still with that kind of calm and gentle gaze. Just when Wei Wei Bai thought that he wouldn't say anything. With a magnetic voice, he spoke in a low and hoarse voice. "You're married to me, so we're one body. Your room is also my room." Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment. "When did I marry you?" Yi Yuxuan blinked, his eyes actually looked innocent. "In the future." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Was this flirting? Was it? She had just experienced flirting, and she was stabbed to death. So for a moment, she didn't want to flirt anymore. Wei Wei Bai carefully communicated with the system. "He's not draining my life points now." The system replied calmly, "He's draining, of course he's draining. It's just that the system has a delay, so I haven't reminded you yet. Your life points have been drained for 5 days. Slash. Chapter 787. He changed when she woke up. Although she was in this plane for a few months, in reality it was only 3 days. Why was it that every time she woke up, she felt that Yi Yuxuan's personality would undergo an obvious change? Was this man schizophrenia? System, of course there's a problem. If you don't work hard, your life value will be sucked away. Isn't this a big enough problem? Wei Wei Bai thought about it. Indeed, was there any problem bigger than life value? There wasn't. Even if Yi Yuxuan suddenly turned into a dinosaur or a sissy. As long as there was life value, it could be taken. She didn't care. Sure enough, she was such a strong and beautiful woman. She had dreams in her heart, and she kept moving forward. The door suddenly opened, and Yi Yuxuan walked in with a food tray. On it was shrimp porridge, as well as some specially cooked things suitable for patients. He put the tray on the side table. Then he picked up the porridge. Eat some. You haven't eaten for a long time. It's not good for your stomach. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the porridge in his hand and couldn't help but frown. Coincidence? The first time Su Menggui cooked, it was also shrimp porridge for her. Yi Yuxuan brought the spoon to her lips and looked at her calmly. Eat some. His tone was gentle, as if he was coaxing her. Wei Wei Bai felt that his voice was simply breaking the rules. Once it was low, each sound had its own special effect that made people's back go numb. She lowered her head, held the porridge in her mouth, and swallowed. She couldn't taste anything. After all, this body didn't eat often. Even if she ate, it was some soup, because only these things could be fed into her mouth while she was sleeping. After eating a spoonful of soup, she licked her lips. Yi Yuxuan's eyes darkened, and his body stiffened. Then he moved his gaze away. His life value automatically increased by 3 days. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Her eyes didn't have a trace of depression from sleeping for a long time, but were incomparably clear. Yi Yuxuan waited for a while before feeding her again. Wei Wei Bai casually let the collar of her pajamas fall below her shoulders. With an innocent look on her face, she continued to suck on the spoon. She drank the porridge that he fed her. Yi Yuxuan was dazzled by her fair and smooth shoulders. Yi Yuxuan froze again. His HP increased by another 2 days. Wei Wei Bai gave him a flirtatious look. Continue feeding me. I'm hungry. The gentleness on Yi Yuxuan's face disappeared. His jaw tightened, his lips pursed, and his breathing became disorderly. Then he suppressed it. He continued to feed her. Wei Wei Bai exposed her legs from time to time. Her eyes were seductive but not obvious. Her smile was sweet, soft, and seductive. He could even taste the heat from the porridge. Yi Yuxuan finally couldn't help but reach out and pull up the collar on her shoulders. Wear it. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and stuck out her tongue. Just as she was about to seduce him, Yi Yuxuan stuffed another mouthful of porridge into her mouth. It's delicious. Wei Wei Bai refused to give up. She pulled up her pajamas, revealing more of her legs. Yi Yuxuan was expressionless. He pulled the blanket over her legs. Don't catch a cold. Wei Wei Bai's lips twitched. Then her eyes became seductive as she stared at him. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and looked at the porridge. This is enough. You can't eat too much. After saying that, he didn't even look at her as she twisted her body into a braid, looking as if she was at his mercy. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly tugged at the corner of his shirt. She smiled sweetly and said, "Hubby." Yi Yuxuan finally turned around. His eyes were dark, but they were tinged with light. Then he turned around again and reached out to ruffle her hair. You haven't married me yet. You can call me by my name first. Wei Wei Bai, you're an old stubborn coffin plank. Slash. Chapter 788. After Yi Yuxuan walked out of the door, he looked at the food plate in his hand. His eyes were calm and repressed, as if he was thinking about something. But from time to time, his mind would think of her fair calves, her round shoulders, and that pair of clear, obviously seductive eyes. It was too obvious. Yi Yuxuan thought for a moment, then loosened his collar with one hand. Then he exhaled lightly, then walked back to the kitchen. Wei Wei Bai was still chatting with the system. This tease is worth dozens of life points. Compared to the Shura field at the beginning, the current Yi Yuxuan is so easy to tease. The system was experienced. Of course it's easy to tease if you like him. At the beginning, it was not just the Shura field. Their auras were too similar. Yi Yuxuan was not enlightened, which led to such a tragic tug-of-war. Now this man had been abused in so many planes, even with the dream isolator. That kind of love had long been deep in his bones. If it was not for the severe emotional loss, Yi Yuxuan's life points would be lost even more. Wei Wei Bai held her face. I'm so lovable. How long has it been, and I've already fallen in love. Although she used a lot of time to transmigrate between planes. But each time in reality, it took 3 days. In total, it did not take that long. The system said, when you're praising yourself, can you first send a high-energy warning bullet screen? Take care of the normal reader's eyes. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, then suddenly snorted coldly. Then she held her face with both hands, shook her head deliberately, and said in a high-pitched voice, I'm the cutest, the most beautiful, the world's first Mary Sue is me. Everyone loves me, flowers bloom when they see me, men are overjoyed when they see me. He he he. The system, it chose to die, don't stop it. After disgusting the system, Wei Wei Bai smiled and looked up. Then she saw Yi Yuxuan standing at the door. His expression was expressionless, his body was straight and slender, and his eyes were indifferent. However, there was something wrong with the atmosphere. Wei Wei Bai, she chose death. Don't stop her. The corners of Yi Yuxuan's mouth suddenly curved, and he couldn't help but smile. His laughter was low and deep, and his eyes curved up. There was a kind of person who, when he smiled, you would see all the sunlight in the world fall into his eyes. Yi Yuxuan was just like that. His face, which had never smiled before, suddenly smiled without warning. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a few seconds. Yi Yuxuan was also stunned. Then, he put away his smile and frowned. He couldn't help but recall the emotions he felt at that moment. That was, bursting with joy. Or, was it the joy of liking someone to the extreme? He couldn't explain it, but it felt good. Was this the feeling of happiness? The system reminded, he smiled just now. 10 days of life. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, it was as if she had been injected with chicken blood. She immediately rushed off the bed and ran in front of Yi Yuxuan. She stood on her tiptoes and reached out her hands to pinch his cheeks. Smile again. Yi Yuxuan's handsome face was a little comical because of her pinching. He looked at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. Her beautiful eyes had lost the disguise of indifference, and were unexpectedly pure and lovely. Wei Wei Bai didn't expect that one day, she would be able to see such a feeling of cuteness on Yi Yuxuan. She had lived for a long time and could see everything. Wei Wei Bai had already trained her super shameless skills. She wasn't afraid at all and asked again, Yi Yuxuan, smile again. Yi Yuxuan pursed his lips and found that this action was a little difficult under her tugging. To read the ad https://www.sashu.com/ to read at https://www.sashu.com to read at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 789. He reached out and grabbed her wrist, making her let go of his pitiful face. Then he lowered his head and said calmly, Why do you want to see me smile? Wei Wei Bai didn't think much and blurted out, Because you're super handsome. A man smiling so brightly that flowers bloomed all over the world. She had never seen such a good-looking smile. System, isn't it for the health points? Drama Queen Bai really dared to say anything to coax people. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and looked at her. At this moment, she was telling the truth. He was very handsome, so she wanted him to smile. Yi Yuxuan didn't know what kind of mood he had, but there was a kind of sour and sweet eagerness that made him want to obey her words. He pulled up the corner of his mouth, revealing a calm smile. It was a little jerky, not as natural as before. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "How much did my health points increase?" System, deduct 1 day's worth of health points. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yi Yuxuan, then said calmly, "Your smile isn't handsome." He actually dared to deduct 1 day's worth of health points. She said again, "Stop smiling." She was afraid that her health points would be deducted again. Yi Yuxuan stopped smiling as expected, and his expression was a little gloomy. System, deduct 5 days' worth of health points. Wei Wei Bai, Yi Yuxuan pursed his lips, was silent for a moment, then suddenly bent down and carried her up in a princess carry. Then he walked to the side of the bed and stuffed her on it. He said, "You're weak, don't move around too much, rest well." Wei Wei Bai quickly reached out and tugged at his sleeve. "What about you?" He was her life now. It was a genuine life. If he ran away, just based on her health points in this world, she would be done for. Yi Yuxuan sat on the side of the bed, then crossed his hands and supported his chin, looking at her with a strange heaviness in his eyes. It was as if he was observing some precious animal. Their gazes were filled with curiosity. Wei Wei Bai lay on the bed obediently. From time to time, he would check with the system to see how much HP he had left. However, Yi Yuxuan saw that she was occasionally in a daze and occasionally in a trance. He was silently calculating in his heart. He suddenly said, "Why did you seduce me?" Bai Weiwei almost didn't use her brain to answer this kind of question. She reflexively answered, "I like you ah." His HP increased by another 2 days. Then, another 4 days were deducted. Only then did Wei Wei Bai react. "What the hell? If I like someone who follows the rules like you, why would my HP be deducted?" Yi Yuxuan changed her sitting position and continued to place her fingers on the armrest of the chair. She tapped the armrest with her fingertips. He tilted his head, and under his black bangs, that pair of calm eyes stared intently at her. She felt like he had seen through everything. Wei Wei Bai, on the other hand, was extremely calm as she looked at him. The two of them looked at each other silently. An invisible tension made the atmosphere tense. Finally, Yi Yuxuan bent over. His body was shrouded in shadow, and his eyes became frighteningly sharp. Bai Weiwei couldn't help but tense up under the immense pressure. He said softly and unhurriedly, "Who are you talking to, Weiwei?" Weiwei Bai's eyes were blank. "What did you say? Who else is here besides you?" Yi Yuxuan shook his head. "I just calculated. Your eyes were not focused at least 5 times, but your expression changed 7 times. It was as if someone was talking to you, and you were replying to him in your mind." When he asked, he looked at her expression very intently. It was as if he would catch every slight change in her expression. // Chapter 790. Wei Wei Bai's mind was filled with thoughts, but she maintained her composure and smiled. "Maybe I've been thinking about you. My mind is full of you, so I couldn't help but talk to you." Yi Yuxuan was confused. "Talk to me." Wei Wei Bai reached out and gently hooked his loosened collar. Her eyes were still pure and innocent. Her voice was sweet and soft. "Have you never thought about me? Don't you have a lot of me in your mind? This is what it means to miss someone. When you think about someone, you can't help but talk to him in your mind. Of course, your expression will change too, it's all sweet." The system said, "Oh, so you always have a sweet expression when you talk to me. You love me so much." Wei Wei Bai said, "Scram, a poor shorty doesn't deserve my love." The poor shorty system was speechless. Yi Yuxuan said, your expression just now clearly looked like you were scolding someone. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and pulled him closer to her face. Her warm breath blew on his face. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but hold his breath. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, what, I miss you and like you, but I'm not allowed to scold you. I'm scolding you, you heartless ghost. Yi Yuxuan felt a chill down his spine. What happened? He didn't realize that he was getting goosebumps because of this mushy sentence. The system responded truthfully, evil. Wei Wei Bai had to be professional when it came to acting. She turned into a demon, I miss you, but did you miss me? My mind is full of you, but what's in your mind? You don't have me in your heart, how can I not scold you? The system vomited and died. Before it died, it left behind its last words. Stop it, this line is going to kill me. Fuck, it's so mushy. Why didn't the host poison herself to death? Yi Yuxuan was pulled by her, but he didn't move. He maintained the same position. His previous appearance of precise calculation had disappeared. Although he was still expressionless, his eyes started to look evasive. Wei Wei Bai did not give up. Do you have it? Do you? Yi Yuxuan finally looked at her again. His gaze was very focused, and his tone was doubtful. My mind is full of you. Is it because I miss you? Wei Wei Bai blinked. Why did she feel that Yi Yuxuan looked a little silly? Yi Yuxuan pursed his thin lips and finally said again, then do I miss you? Because during this time, my mind is full of you, every second. No matter what he did, she would always be in his mind. He had never left for even a second. The fake sweet smile on Wei Wei Bai's face stiffened. Her flirting skills were a little too high. He felt like he had encountered a formidable opponent. She coughed softly. It's good that you miss me. I won't scold you anymore. Yi Yuxuan faintly grunted. His words of love were calm, and his response was also particularly calm. Then he continued to ask, why do you want to seduce me? Wei Wei Bai had seduced him from the start. He definitely did not misunderstand. He had even held an expert seminar to discuss the process of a woman seducing a man. There were also various reasons for the woman's mood changes. So he definitely did not get it wrong. Wei Wei Bai had always been seducing him. The smile on Wei Wei Bai's face disappeared. Couldn't he get past this hurdle? Her gaze softened. Because I like you. Sincere and flawless. Yi Yuxuan sized up her expression. You're lying. You're only seducing me, not liking me. Is at https://www.sashu.com/. Chapter 791. Wei Wei Bai's expression became more natural. No, I really like you. The first time I saw you, Yi Yuxuan reached out a long finger and pressed it lightly on her lips. He looked at her calmly and firmly. His thin lips moved slightly again. No, when you lie, your eyelashes flutter. Wei Wei Bai. Whose eyelashes don't flutter? Even plastic people's eyelashes flutter. How could her eyelashes betray her? Yi Yuxuan narrowed his eyes. There was actually a tinge of coldness in his eyes. What's your motive? Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but bend her fingers stiffly. It was a nervous but discreet action. But it was such a small action. Yi Yuxuan grabbed her fingers easily. Look, you're nervous. Wei Wei Bai, she had met a high-level player. He could actually capture such a small action. This must be a freaking computer scan. Bai Weiwei didn't change, she didn't admit it even if she was beaten to death. There's no doubt about the fact that I like you. Yi Yuxuan, you're wrong. That's not how I like you. Wei Wei Bai sized him up in disdain. Damn rookie, old virgin, a 10,000-year-old bachelor who had never taken care of a girl before. What right did he have to talk to her about what it was like to like? Then what do you think it's like? Yi Yuxuan thought about it seriously and said, you should write a love letter or a confession bookmark and put it in the book I'm used to reading. Then, you should look at me shyly and say to me, let's go watch a movie. Wei Wei Bai, Yi Yuxuan, when we're watching a movie, you should take the opportunity to hold my hand. At that time, our hearts will beat faster at the same time. Wei Wei Bai, Yi Yuxuan, after the date, you'll confess and then we can kiss. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless. No, she had nothing to live for. Yi Yuxuan nodded seriously. Liking someone isn't just a matter of words. You have to do it. This is the process of liking someone. Wei Wei Bai, so Yi Yuxuan is a pure and innocent person. He was just short of rolling on the bed. This man actually thought that only by watching a movie could he be considered to have liked her. Wei Wei Bai looked at him sympathetically. This was a perfect example of someone who was destined to be a bachelor based on his own abilities. He was the absolute king of bachelors. I'll write you a love letter, and then we'll go watch a movie. Yi Yuxuan thought for a moment and then nodded reservedly. Are you going on a date with me? Wei Wei Bai, are you crazy? Are you schizophrenic? Wasn't she about to get engaged the last time she came back? Wasn't she very mature back then? Why did he become so childish? He couldn't seem to connect with his previous personality. She didn't have a split personality. Yi Yuxuan, on the other hand, was very intelligent. A faint doubt flashed through her heart. Bai Weiwei hid this trace of doubt very well, and then she revealed a smile that grinded her teeth. Yes, I'm going on a date with you. After all, liking someone requires action. Yi Yuxuan sighed in relief, and his expression finally softened. I know you're lying, but I still can't help but agree to your invitation. Wei Wei Bai, how did she expose herself? However, the system knew that Yi Yuxuan represented absolute rationality and calmness. So as long as Wei Wei Bai was lying, he would be able to detect it. This kind of terrifying observation ability was not something a normal person could have. It glanced at Wei Wei Bai, and then looked at the steadily rising health points. So what if he was rational? He still couldn't escape the fate of loving her. Wei Wei Bai really couldn't do anything about Yi Yuxuan's observation ability. She saw that he was going to seriously analyze the dozens of reasons why she was lying. She quickly covered it with her mouth and kissed it. Yi Yuxuan was stunned. Wei Wei Bai left, and he moved his lips. Wei Wei Bai pouted again and chirped. He froze. Her kiss was heavy and fast, sweet and cute. Wei Wei Bai saw his dazed look and quickly chirped on his lips again. Yi Yuxuan's brain calculated and analyzed rationally. He even began to suspect that the her in his dream had been deceiving him in his dream, which was infinitely close to the truth. And because of her kiss, the chirp disappeared. She lied to him, and he was willing to be lied to. //T Chapter 792. Although Wei Wei Bai's body was still weak, the vegetative life given by the system had the function of combing the body. It was to prevent the body from becoming useless from sleeping. So as long as Wei Wei Bai's heart disease did not relapse, there would be no major problems. She looked at the various dishes on the table and picked up a piece of braised pork ribs. Come, eat some, Xian Xian. Yi Yuxuan looked at her sideways, his eyes were soft and bright. Wei Wei Bai also reached out and supported herself, teasing him openly, eat more, then you'll have the strength to hug me. These sweet and mushy words. Yi Yuxuan still had a paralyzed expression, but he ate the food she picked up gracefully. Wei Wei Bai picked up a prawn, peeled it herself, and put it into his bowl. Xian, this prawn is delicious, eat more. Yi Yuxuan's chopsticks paused, and he looked up, the gentleness in his eyes more obvious. Even his stoic expression exuded tenderness like water. Then he also picked up some food and gently put it in Wei Wei Bai's bowl. You're weak, eat more. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of sweetness, and she nodded. You love me the most. System, evil. Qin Qiu, evil. Bai Changyan, woo-woo. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and looked over, seeing two big light bulbs across the table. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu. Her father and her attending physician. Qin Qiu saw Wei Wei Bai looking over, and quickly put food in her bowl. Come, Wei Wei, eat more healthy food. It was to cover up the sound that he had just made when he was disgusted by their mushy words. But when he put food in her bowl, Yi Yuxuan stuck his chopsticks, took the food, and threw it back into Qin Qiu's bowl. She doesn't eat other people's saliva. Qin Qiu, so she eats your saliva. Bai Changyan ate alone as he stared at the other side of the table. Wei Wei Bai saw him, and showed a sincere smile. Dad, it's delicious. Bai Changyan immediately showed a surprised smile. I ordered the kitchen to make these, they're all your favorite dishes. Wei Wei Bai smiled and nodded, and picked up a piece of stewed tofu. Bai Changyan's eyes brightened, this was his favorite food. He quickly took the bowl and leaned over. Wei Wei Bai quickly put the tofu into Yi Yuxuan's bowl. Tofu is so hard. So she increased HP. Yi Yuxuan's eyes moved, and as expected, his expression became gentler. Her HP also increased HP. Bai Wei Wei smiled even more adorably. Yi Yuxuan also gazed at her, expressionless and happy. Romantic and affectionate, a handsome man and a beautiful woman, it felt like they were in another world. No one was allowed to enter. Bai Changyan silently took back the bowl. Qin Qiu looked at Wei Wei Bai, and then looked at the damn Yi Yuxuan. Then he bitterly picked up a piece of chestnut stewed chicken and stuffed it into Bai Changyan's bowl. Only you can pick up food. I can too. Come, let's see the super death resentment of a 10,000-year single dog. Bai Changyan was also moved and put food into Qin Qiu's bowl. Eat more. Qin Qiu looked back at him, and suddenly felt sad. It was Wei Wei Bai who picked up food for Yi Yuxuan. It was Wei Wei Bai's father who picked up food for him. Damn, no one loved him when he was with Yi Yuxuan since he was a child. When he grew up, no one still loved him. He was going to blacken. So Qin Qiu grabbed a plate of shrimp in front of him, letting him show off his love. Yi Yuxuan suddenly said, "Don't move." Wei Wei Bai blinked, and a trace of doubt appeared on her fair and beautiful face. Yi Yuxuan leaned close to her. Wei Wei Bai immediately understood. She closed her eyes and looked up expectantly. Her cheeks were slightly red, her beautiful eyelashes trembled, and her fair skin was unbelievably beautiful under the sun. Chapter 793. Her lips were slightly pouting. Old Father Bai and Dog Qin were both speechless. What kind of third wheel were they? Even the plate of prawns on the table had more presence than them. Yi Yuxuan stretched out his finger, the tip of his finger lightly brushed past her lips like a feather. Then he said, "There's a grain of rice on it." Before he could kiss Wei Wei Bai, who had opened her eyes. Old Father Bai and Dog Qin. At the same time, they thought, he really doesn't understand flirting. Then they saw Yi Yuxuan looking at the grain of rice on his finger indifferently. He didn't seem to think much, his thin lips sucked the grain of rice into his mouth, then he said softly, "Don't waste it." His tone was calm. His posture was natural. He looked like he didn't have any friends. Wei Wei Bai's heart beat wildly for a while, then she said to the system, "System, I've been flirted with." "System, what? Isn't this a slap to your face? You're in charge of flirting, this is the biggest insult to your professional ability. Get him. Flirt back to prove your strength, girl." Wei Wei Bai's eyes flashed with a sharp light, she suddenly turned around and immediately changed her appearance. Her eyes were misty and soft, her cheeks were flushed, and her smile was gentle. She pursed her lips, hesitated a little, then stretched out her finger and gently tapped the back of his hand. Yi Yuxuan turned back. Wei Wei Bai's voice was soft, the ending was sweet like spring water. "Do you want a date?" Yi Yuxuan's expression finally changed, his eyebrows raised. He felt that the back of his hand was wrapped around by her finger. Lightly tapped into his heart, it made his heart beat uncontrollably. He restrained and said, "Date." Bai Changyan slammed the table and stood up. "What date? If you dare to take my daughter to some messy place, I'll be the first to disagree." Qin Chiu quickly pulled on old Father Bai's clothes. "Wei Wei's dad, I think young people still need to improve their relationship." Yi Yuxuan's expression also changed, he looked at Bai Changyan indifferently. Then, his voice was calm and oppressive. "My intended wife, wherever I am, she has to be. Wherever she asks me to go, I will go. In the eyes of the law, she is already an adult. You have no right to question or control her choice." These words really pierced Bai Changyan's heart. He pointed at Yi Yuxuan's face and said, "You little beast, don't think that just because I agree to your engagement, I will marry Wei Wei to you. If I don't agree, Wei Wei won't agree either, right, Wei Wei?" "Wei Wei Bai, I agree." Bai Changyan was heartbroken. Qin Chiu patted him on the shoulder. "Our daughter has grown up. Don't worry about her." Tears streamed down Bai Changyan's face. "You want this stinking brat? You don't want me anymore. Do you still remember how I changed your diapers when you were young and fed you milk powder in the middle of the night?" Wei Wei Bai stood up at once, stretched out her hands, and held Bai Changyan's trembling hands. She was moved to tears and said, "Dad, how could I forget? Every time you went out, you would bring me a gift. When I was sick, you were always with me. On my first day of school, you were afraid that I wouldn't be able to adapt, so you didn't go to work and followed me to school." Bai Changyan was brought into those warm times by her. Wei Wei Bai showed a grateful smile. "I remember how you loved me. Thank you, Dad." Bai Changyan's heart softened and he couldn't get up. He said, "Of course, Dad loves you. I'll give you whatever you want." "Wei Wei Bai, I want Yi Yuxuan." Bai Changyan quickly said, "Yes, yes, yes. I'll give you whoever you want." "Qin Chiu," Wei Wei Bai said with a smile, "then I'm going out to play, Dad." Bai Changyan, okay. Remember to bring medicine and your phone. Take care of your body." Wei Wei Bai pulled Yi Yuxuan up. "I know. Goodbye." Old Father Bai settled it in a few minutes. Chapter 794. When Qin Chiu saw that the lovey-dovey couple had left, he finally couldn't help but ask a key question. "Wait, they haven't said what they're going to do yet. Damn, it's painful to be in the middle of a spoiler." Bai Changyan's eyes were soft. "Anywhere is fine as long as my Wei Wei is happy." Qin Chiu was silent. A daughter con is really scary. When Wei Wei Bai walked out, Yi Yuxuan suddenly stopped in his tracks. He pulled her. His expression was a little gloomy. Wei Wei Bai was puzzled. "What's wrong? Aren't we going to watch a movie?" Yi Yuxuan looked at her and suddenly said in a cold voice, "I can also watch over you when you're sick, change your diapers and make milk powder for you. I'll follow you to school and guard you 24 hours a day." In addition, I'll have the right to choose any gift in the world. He paused for a second. Then he said, so, can you remember how I love you? This sentence made the smile at the corner of Bai Weiwei's mouth stiffen. She wanted to say that she didn't need milk powder and diapers anymore. She didn't need to go to school. But these words couldn't come out of her mouth. The sweet smile on her face slowly disappeared. The two of them stood under the sun. Their expressions were equally calm, but there was a sense of tension surging within them. Wei Bai suddenly smiled, and there was a hint of fatigue in her smile. I don't know, Yi Yuxuan. Who knew what would happen in the future? Suddenly, she didn't want to lie to him. She didn't even listen to the system's warning. Maybe it was because she knew that Yi Yuxuan had been watching her hypocritical look. She didn't know if it was in a fit of pique. She actually told the truth. She was obviously trying to seduce him. She was so thick-skinned that she wouldn't admit it even if her lie was exposed. Yi Yuxuan's expression didn't change, but his eyes were unusually deep. He held her hand tightly and suddenly walked forward. Wei Bai was pulled by him. Yi Yuxuan looked straight ahead. It's okay. If you can't remember, it's because I don't love you enough. I'll work hard. At this point, he pondered for a few seconds. Only then did he say seriously, I'll work so hard that you won't forget me. He was persistent and peaceful. But it was a sweet vow. His HP instantly increased by 10 days. Wei Bai held her breath and looked up at him. His back was facing her. His body was straight and slender, and his fingers pulled her forcefully. It was as if he could take her to the end of the world. The anxiety of death in her heart was smoothed away by his strong calmness. Wei Bai's gaze couldn't help but soften. Without a trace of impurities. Since he asked her to come to the cinema, she came to the cinema. Yi Yuxuan didn't think too much about it. There was a 5-star hotel next to the cinema. It seemed like it was his first time in the cinema. He stood at the entrance of the cinema in a daze. In the bustling crowd, Yi Yuxuan's appearance was too stunning. His handsome face was cold and dazzling. He put one hand in his trouser pocket and stood straight as he looked around. Wei Bai said, buy the movie tickets first. Yi Yuxuan nodded. Then the two of them stood together and went to queue. The people in the queue turned back to look at them from time to time. The two of them were very eye-catching. When they stood together, the people around them couldn't help but take a few steps back. They were afraid that this couple, who seemed to have been photoshopped, would set them off as the cruel background. Even Photoshop couldn't create such beauty. Yi Yuxuan looked around indifferently. He was very calm about the gazes of others. Wei Bai was also very calm. She was already used to the gazes of all kinds of emotions brought about by beauty. The calm couple finally had their turn to buy the tickets. Wei Bai raised a beautiful smile and said to the guy buying the tickets, buy the tickets. Then, she bought a discounted ticket and a bucket of popcorn. Chapter 795. Beauty could be used as money. This was the truth that Wei Bai had known since she was young. Yi Yuxuan was expressionless. Suddenly, he took out a few large bills from his wallet and threw them on the table. He then covered Wei Bai's mouth with one hand to cover her smile and said coldly to the ticket seller, keep the change. The ticket seller's mouth twitched. What kind of operation was this? He said, sir, you've already paid. It was awkward to use money to slap people in the face these days. Yi awkward overbearing CEO Xian said coldly, I'll fire you after I buy the cinema. The ticket seller, Wei Bai was speechless. Yi Yuxuan then dragged Wei Bai away. He even said to her, you don't have to smile at him. Although your smile can be exchanged for discounted tickets, your smile is much more expensive than the discounted tickets. It's not worth it. Wei Bai, this was the first time someone said that her smile was expensive. She then remembered to ask, "You're joking about buying the cinema, right?" She thought that Yi Yuxuan had said it out of turn. Yi Yuxuan looked at her indifferently. "I'm not joking. I'm going to buy the cinema and fire the ticket seller." Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before looking at him strangely. "Are you jealous?" Yi Yuxuan looked at her calmly. After a moment of silence, he suddenly took out his phone. He then looked up the physical and psychological changes of jealousy. He compared it and found that there was a 90% similarity. Then, under Wei Bai's stunned expression, he nodded calmly. "Yes, I'm jealous." After saying that, he frowned again. "If I'm jealous, will you coax me?" In the reference example of jealousy, the other half would always coax them. Wei Bai was really defeated by him. She stuffed him with a few pieces of popcorn. Her face was expressionless, and her voice was emotionless as she said, "Be good, don't be angry. If you hurt your body, I'll be heartbroken." Yi Yuxuan nodded in satisfaction. "Okay, I got it." The system couldn't help but rub its face as it watched the two emotionless people fall in love. He was afraid that his face would be paralyzed as well. The movie was a romance movie, a must-watch movie on a date. It was a beautiful and tragic love story. In the dark cinema, cries could be heard from time to time. Wei Bai and Yi Yuxuan cold-blooded and emotionless watched. From time to time, Yi Yuxuan would point behind the female lead. "There's a Hyundai car there." The movie was from ancient times. Wei Bai also saw it with her sharp eyes. Yes, the alley that they ran to just now had advertisements for infertility treatment and circumcision. Yes. Yi Yuxuan said, "There's also a notice about a search for a husky." Wei Bai said, "The female lead's makeup is smudged. Even her neck is a few shades darker." Yi Yuxuan said, "I saw the director's feet exposed in the camera." The audience sitting next to them was so moved that they kept crying. In the end, the audience kept cursing. They came to watch a love story to detoxify, but they were exposed. There was no way to live. In the end, the female lead died in the male lead's arms. "Forget me, find a better woman, don't be sad for me for more than 3 days." The cinema was suddenly filled with cries. Wei Bai and Yi Yuxuan cold-blooded and emotionless watched indifferently. Then Yi Yuxuan said, "That's it." Wei Bai said, "That's it." Yi Yuxuan thought for a moment. "I'll leave first, wait for me." Wei Bai nodded. As soon as Yi Yuxuan left, the system said, "The 500 external life points are full." Although Yi Yuxuan's life points were deducted from time to time because he was not in a good mood, but when he was in a bad mood, his life points increased by a shocking number. Wei Bai looked at the female lead who died in the male lead's arms with a complicated expression. She sighed, then leaned her head against the back of the chair. "Let's go, Tongzi." She stayed for 2 days this time. It was the first time she stayed for 2 days in reality. The system said, "You can stay for a few more days to rest." Wei Bai was silent, then finally said, "No, let's go." There was no emotional shield in reality. She could not be indifferent to Yi Yuxuan. So, she could only escape. When Yi Yuxuan walked in with the roses, he saw Wei Bai with her eyes closed. There was some noise around them. Only she was so quiet and gentle. Yi Yuxuan looked at her quietly for a few seconds, then put the roses in her hand. Then he leaned his head on her shoulder, close to her neck, and felt the vibration of her arteries. She was alive. Then, tears suddenly fell from his calm eyes. He was not afraid that she would fall asleep, but he was afraid that she would suddenly die. Chapter 796. Wei Wei Bai woke up with a familiar headache and found herself half leaning on the beauty chair. A servant girl with 2 buns on her head whispered that Chi Chimu has come. Chi Chimu. Just as she was thinking this, the system's memory and reminder came at the same time. This mission is to obtain Chi Chimu's love. Target, Chi Chimu. Completion, 0. Time, 1.5 years. 1.5 years, this time was frighteningly ample. Wei Wei Bai massaged her temples, looking at the jumbled memories. This mission was a rebirth mission. The one reborn was Chi Chimu. Chi Chimu could be considered the original owner's older cousin. Because of his rough life and the death of both his parents, he had no choice but to live under someone else's roof in the Bai family. From a young age, he was regarded as a freeloader and was bullied everywhere. But because the Bai family was considered an aristocratic family of officials, they didn't eat or drink less. Even if it was called bullying, it was just bullying between children. It couldn't be considered a life and death feud. The turning point happened when Chi Chimu was 7 years old. He was dragged by Wei Wei Bai's older brother, Bai Chi, to the ice lake to fish. Bai Chi had the idea of teasing him and kicked him into the ice cave. Chi Chimu casually pulled Bai Chi into the ice cave. The 2 children fell into the ice cave, life and death hanging by a thread. When they were finally rescued, Bai Chi had already breathed his last. And because Chi Chimu's body was stronger, he was lucky to survive. Bai Chi was the eldest grandson of the Bai family, but he died. But Chi Chimu, this little bastard who had no parents, survived. From that day on, Chi Chimu's nightmare began. Everyone in the Bai family, from the young masters and misses, to the servants and servants, they all abused him under the Bai family's tacit approval. They believed that he killed Bai Chi. Chi Chimu grew up in the Bai family's environment of all kinds of abuse and humiliation. Then at the age of 19, he tried every method to obtain the opportunity to take the imperial examinations and became the top scorer. Then he hooked up with the 3rd prince and toppled the crown prince. He became a rich son-in-law in the eyes of the prime minister. And the Bai family, which was originally a family of low-ranking officials, was destroyed by Chi Chimu, who came for revenge. The men were all executed by 1,000 cuts. The women's faces were branded with the mark of sin and thrown into the barracks as military prostitutes. They would not stop until they were tortured to death. When Wei Wei Bai saw this, she had a bad premonition and frowned. Then the memories continued, and it was Chi Chimu's death from poisoning. This poison was very strange. Back then, when he obtained the top scorer and returned to the Bai family, Madame Bai already knew that he was here for revenge. Therefore, he added a tasteless and colorless special drug to his tea. There was no poison, so he couldn't test it. Then, the original host, Wei Wei Bai, appeared. She had a natural body fragrance. This kind of body fragrance was special. It could actually trigger the medicine in Chi Chimu's body, slowly poisoning him to death. Seeing this, Wei Wei Bai, who had a face full of logic, could only put on an expression of despair. What the hell was going on? Her body fragrance and an unknown drug had killed Chi Chimu. Then Chi Chimu was reborn, back. Favorable impression points. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -40. It was just a bit less than the enmity of Chet Ding Ding. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but ask the system, before he was reborn, what was the favorability of the original host. The system flipped through the information. Oh, the initial favorability was 20. Seeing that the little girl was cute, later the little girl was vicious and bullied him, so the favorability became -10. Wei Wei Bai, what about the original host's fate before she was reborn? Why does it seem like she's pixelated? System, oh, in response to the call to eliminate pornography and promote righteousness. The unsuitable scene can't be exaggerated too much. Way by, favorability -10, what unsuitable scene is that, / the. Chapter 797. After all, when the original owner died, the slow-acting poison in Chi-Chimu's body hadn't been discovered yet. So the favorability shouldn't have changed much. The system said, because he hated the original owner for making him dress up as a woman and bark like a dog when he was young, he called over a dozen big men to do the same thing to the original owner. Then, he called over a dozen big dogs to provoke the original owner. In the end, the original owner died beyond recognition, and more than half of the body was eaten by the dogs. Way by. Ugh. She couldn't take it anymore. She had successfully disgusted the audience and herself. The system said, later, he found out that his poison was caused by your mother, and it was triggered by your body fragrance, so he dug out your body and ground your bones to ashes. Way by, Slagstem, I'm a bit cold. The system said, it's okay, let the male lead call a few more dogs to accompany you, then you won't be cold. Way by, I quit acting and chose to commit suicide. I still have 510 days of life value anyway. So she was still alive when she returned to reality. Having life value was willful. The system immediately said, I lied to you, there was no exciting scene of a man, a beast, or a big man doing it. In fact, the original owner's final ending was suicide, and then she was fed to the dogs by the angry Chi-Chimu. Way by wanted to roar, this was also very cruel, okay? The system said earnestly, you've passed all the hurdles, how can you be lazy now? 500 days of life value is just a little more than a year. Living a little more than a year, isn't that a short-lived ghost? Way by, you can flirt with Yi Yuxuan in reality. The system said, if the strategy fails, even if your soul is lucky enough to pass through the plane storm and return to reality, your body can't accommodate external life value, so Yi Yuxuan is also useless. Way by just remembered this. After successfully attacking the plane and returning, it could accommodate the life value given by Yi Yuxuan. The system said, also, I just remembered, if you fail and return, you can't immediately pass through the plane again. Way by asked, what do you mean? The system replied, it means that you have to spend all of your life points before you can enter the realm again. For example, if she had 500 days of life, she would have to spend that many days before she could enter the plane again. Way by trembled and spoke quickly. Call him in. The young man outside the door stood as straight as a pine tree. Just looking at his back made people feel that he was incomparably handsome. But when he turned around, it made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Her black hair was tied into 2 ponytails, and her clothes were also a girl's jacket and skirt, bright red and green. Even his fair and handsome face was smeared with some rouge, making him look extremely comical. However, his eyes were pitch black and cold, like a bottomless pool, suffused with cold air, abnormally deep. The door opened and a young maid walked out, her face full of disdain. Let you in, Chi-Chimu. Chi-Chimu, who should clearly be considered half a master. In this family, her status was even lower than that of a female servant. Anyone could call out his name and order him around. Even if Chi-Chimu was smeared with ridiculous rouge, one could still see that his delicate face was suddenly frighteningly cold. He faintly swept a glance over the young maid, his cold aura sending a chill down people's backs. The young maid immediately retreated a few steps, her heart fearful. Then she frowned and shouted, "What, you still dare to glare at me? Be careful, I'll have the young miss chase you into the laundry room to wash your clothes." The people who did the laundry were the lowest of the lowest. When Chichimu heard the young miss, he thought of his previous life. The scene of Wei Wei Bai's unrecognizable corpse being dug up by him and her bones being ground to dust. His mood improved a bit. // The Chapter 798. Then he lightly pursed his lips, restraining the incomparably oppressive cold light in his eyes. He said softly, "Little Jijia, please forgive me. I saw that you were beautiful and couldn't help but take a few more glances. I was rude." The little maid immediately raised her chin proudly. "Consider yourself to have good eyes. All right, hurry and get in." Chichimu calmly pursed his lips, smiling faintly. Then he turned and walked through the door. There was a screen at the door. The Bai family's daughter lived like a prince. She was pampered, but raised with an arrogant appearance that made people nauseous. Chichimu recalled that since childhood, the person who bullied him the most was Wei Wei Bai. This woman was 2 years younger than him. Her methods of humiliating others were more formidable than his. He looked at the woman's clothes on his body and recalled her arrogant, cold smile as she ordered, "I lack a maid to dress and make up. In the future, wear women's clothing and come comb my hair and dress me." That one sentence crushed his pride as a man to pieces. A bloodthirsty light flashed through Chichimu's eyes. Now was not the time to break away from the Bai family. He could only endure. He was just about to bend down behind the screen to speak to Wei Wei Bai. Behind the screen, an arrogant, soft, and sweet shout came from behind. "What are you still standing at the door for? Hurry and come in. The sun is already in the middle of the day and you're only here now." It was clearly an order. But why did it sound like she was acting coquettishly? Chichimu was absent-minded. He, who had just been reborn, couldn't remember if Wei Wei Bai used to speak in this tone before. As he thought about it, he stepped into the hall. Then he calmly raised his eyes and glanced. He was slightly stunned. On the beauty chair, the young girl was leaning against it, her moon-white strapless dress flowing down the chair like water. Under her willow-like delicate brows, her black eyes were as clear as a pool of spring water, quick-witted and soaring. Her beautiful and slender fingers gently supported her bright and clean forehead. Her raven black hair was scattered, faintly revealing her fragile and elegant neck and that delicate white skin. This kind of her, bright and beautiful, carried a fragile softness. Even though her eyes were cold, there was still a hint of sweetness in them. For a moment, Chichimu couldn't retract his gaze, and his breathing grew heavier. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his expression. She got up impatiently. "You're only here now. I have to pay my respects to my mother." Chichimu was now Wei Wei Bai's dressing maid. No one dared to raise any objections. Chichimu heard her mention her mother. Only then did he remember that the woman had poisoned him to death. His eyes turned cold again. He said calmly with a hint of flattery, "Coming, cousin." Wei Wei Bai was sitting on a chair in front of the dressing table. She was casually holding a peach blossom hairpin. When she heard how he addressed her, she turned around and glared at him. The corners of her eyes were red, and her gaze was cold and glamorous. "Who are you calling your cousin? I don't have such a shabby cousin like you." He didn't know if it was intentional or not, but she actually said the word cousin with a bit of emphasis, but with a bit of finesse. He couldn't hear the disdain in it, but it carried a bit of seductive charm. Chichimu paused in his action of picking up the comb, then lowered his head as if nothing had happened. "Then, miss, I'll comb your hair." Wei Wei Bai looked at herself in the mirror, her expression saying, "I'm too beautiful to have a IQ. Comb it a bit better." Chichimu said indifferently, "Okay." There wasn't the slightest feeling of resistance. It was the favorability. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -45. That's right, it dropped another 5 points. Should she make a few more points and drop the favorability to -55? That way, she could break through that plane of vengeance. / Download. Read on. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Save button below to record this reading record. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.